My father's cabin in the woods burned down. We found something strange in the ruins. So my father used to own a cabin. In fact, he used to own a lot of different properties. Which I suppose is just a roundabout way of saying that we grew up with money. Where things get a bit complicated is how he actually made that money. The line that he constantly fed us was that he was an accountant running his own firm in an office in the city. Long hours, lots of business trips. We never saw him much. And whenever we did, he always seemed tired, his eyes perpetually bloodshot, as if he were always trying to force them to stay open. He was sent off to prison right after I'd finished my first year of college. The sentence: 15 years for washing hundreds of millions of dollars for numerous cartels. 2 weeks after he'd been booked, my mother committed suicide. As it turns out, she'd been helping him out through the entire thing and was facing some time herself. I guess she didn't want to deal with all that and took the drastic way out. A few months later, the government had seized pretty much all his property. All of it except for the cabin in the woods. It took a long time for me to feel normal again. But eventually I managed it. Went back to school and graduated with a good enough GP which allowed me to snag some shitty office job a few months later. But it was enough to pay the bills. Fast forward about another year and I've basically scrubbed that entire sequence of events out of my brain. It took a little bit of therapy, a lot of psychedelics, but I finally did it, to the point where I was comfortable enough to go back to the cabin, the one place where I'd see my father for more than a few weeks at a time during our summer trips. I decided to take along 3 of my friends from uni: Jack, Pedro, Randy. We drove down there at the beginning of May. The road leading to the cabin hadn't been maintained at all, and as a result it had become borderline undrivable. I decided to save my vehicle the stress and parked in a nearby lot, leaving us about a 1.5 mile trek through the woods, which really wasn't so bad. Our time in the cabin was pretty much spent getting drunk and stoned, and by the third night we had completely run out of food. We decided to take the 30-minute walk over to the nearest rest stop, where I knew that there was a 24/7 diner. So we go there, eat our meals, and on the way back we notice a burning smell in the woods, as if there was a bonfire raging about nearby. Of course that was a bit strange given that it was around 2 AM, but we didn't think too much of it at the time and we kept walking. It was only when the smell continued to grow stronger as we got closer to the cabin that we understood something was very wrong. Soon it had become suffocating, and we could see the night sky tinged with orange in the near distance. I felt my heart drop into my stomach and immediately I was sprinting, my worst fear realized as I reached the clearing where the cabin was located. Completely up in flames, plumes of dark smoke blending in with the night. It was a mix of different emotions that hit me all at once, the combination of them creating a sense of dread so deep I hadn't thought it possible. After reeling myself in, I called 911, with the operator telling me that the fire department would be on their way but wouldn't be able to reach us for at least 30 minutes. The 4 of us walked away from the cabin in silence, getting far enough so that the smoke was no longer scratching at our throats. Around 10 minutes later, we noticed that the orange tinge in the sky had suddenly disappeared. And I mean suddenly. Like gone in a single blink. I thought I might have been hallucinating, but it was clear from their expressions that my friends were seeing something similar. Cautiously, we started making our way back towards the cabin, noticing that the smoke was no longer heavy in the air, having cleared up considerably. Once we reached the clearing, it had disappeared altogether. I looked ahead, my brain working overtime to comprehend the sight before me. The cabin was no longer on fire. Burned to a crisp, sure. But the raging, overwhelming flames that had been consuming it just minutes prior had somehow completely fizzled out. The 4 of us looked between each other, as if to confirm we were all still seeing the same thing. Using the flashlight on my phone to survey the damage, I found pretty much what I'd expected. Complete destruction. Absolutely zero hope of recovering anything. I started taking some deep breaths, trying to calm myself down when I heard Pedro yelling out from the other side. "Guys, where the fuck did this thing come from?" We all walked over to him. Nestled in the debris was the corpse of something. A monstrosity. It was about the size of a bear, with the sections of its body that weren't burned showing pale, clammy skin with deep cuts etched throughout it in what looked to be some kind of crude pattern. Its head had been smashed in, leaving nothing but an abnormally wide bottom jaw which was still bearing long, black teeth. It had an uncountable number of long, thick arms that it was using to hold something that resembled a human infant, one that appeared to be completely unscathed, devoid of any burn marks. The longer I stared at it, the more that I was convinced I could see it breathing. It was a bizarre enough sight to put us into a near trance. What eventually snapped us out of it was the chanting. It was barely noticeable at first, slowly escalating in pitch until it was clear that there were several human voices shouting in unison. Their tones were animalistic, their words strung together with just the bare beginnings of a rhythm. It sounded like they were speaking English, though I could hardly make out anything they were saying. The strangest part though was how quickly it was getting closer to us. Definitely not a walking pace. It was more like a sprint. The four of us shared a quick glance between each other and immediately there was an understanding. We ran like bats out of hell, tripping over branches, our own feet. But eventually we reached my car, all of us scrambling to pile into it. As I was fumbling for my keys, the chanting had become deafening, to a point that hardly made sense. It sounded as if there were speakers lined up in a circle around us, all blasting that horrible noise. And the second that I had put the keys into the ignition, things went silent. I found myself holding my breath as I looked up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness until what I was seeing was unmistakable. Several figures standing completely still at the edge of the woods. All human-shaped but far too large to be people. All the air being held in my lungs flooded out with one big exhale and I slammed the vehicle into drive and took a sharp turn before speeding the hell out of there, refusing to look in the rear view until we had made it into the highway. I drove until I had reached the rest stop, which was now hosting an absurd number of police cars. I parked, got out, and approached one of the cops, asking if they were here because of the fire. The cop shook his head. Fire? No. Has there been a fire? I explained the situation with the cabin to him, deciding to leave out the creature and the chanting for the time being. The cop nodded slowly, his expression remaining largely the same throughout. All right, he said. We'll look into it. And then give you an update in the morning. For tonight, just get a hotel or something. We exchanged numbers and I thanked him. As I began to walk away, he called out to me. Hey, can I ask you something? I turned back around. Yeah, I said. Sure. Do you happen to be my dad's name's son? For a while I just stared at him. Eventually I nodded. Yeah, he said. I thought I recognized you. I don't understand, I told him. I've never seen you before. The cop took a deep breath before taking a quick look around. Come here, he said. Come close. Tentatively I did so. I can tell you everything. I don't even know everything. But I think you should have the right to know the truth about your father. All of the stuff that has happened here tonight, all of the shit that you've seen, it has something to do with him. He took another look around before continuing. Cartels, right? Was that the story they told you? It is not so creative. But I guess it doesn't have to be creative to be believable. Cause the shit that he was actually mixed up in you would not believe unless you've seen it for yourself. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. Look, I have your number. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. This is something I am curious about as well. Maybe you can give me some answers, point me in the right directions. But not here. So get out of here before people start noticing you. And stay safe. I didn't feel like staying in a hotel that night, so I drove back into the city, dropping everybody off before arriving back at my own apartment. Of course I couldn't sleep that night, my eyes wide open into the morning as I waited for the officer to call. He still hadn't by the time that noon rolled around, and so I tried calling him instead. No answer. Eventually I did receive a call from the police, telling me that my father's cabin had burned down and that it was due to a forest fire. I told them that wasn't possible because there had been no forest fire and that I suspected foul play and wanted it to be investigated. It has already been investigated, are the exact words that the officer told me. Don't worry about it. Just get in touch with insurance. Go over your options. And before I could say anything else, he had hung up on me. It was a mixture of anger and curiosity that compelled me to drive back down there. I am not sure what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't for the road leading towards the rest stop to be blocked altogether. There were 2 cop cars guarding the barrier, with a single officer signaling any vehicles approaching to turn around. I pulled over to the side of the road and after some careful deliberation, I decided to get out and approach him and ask what was going on. Just to see what he might say. When I finished the question, he stared at me for a long time. Uncomfortably long. Emergency construction is what he eventually told me. After that encounter, I pretty much dropped trying to figure things out. Some weird things have started happening to me since. Every night, I swear I can hear a baby crying in the apartment across from mine. The apartment that I thought had been occupied by a pair of college kids who definitely do not have children. The cop that was supposed to call me finally did, a few nights ago. When I answered, I was met with dead silence on the other end. Nearly 30 seconds of it until the line clicked dead. There's an abandoned house sitting across the street from my apartment building, one that has supposedly been there for years because the development of the store meant to take its place keeps getting delayed. Somebody has started staring at me through its second floor window. Whenever I catch them doing it, they quick to close the blinds so I can never catch any details. But I know that the moment I turn away from it, their eyes are back on me. I can confirm that any of these things are related. Whether it has anything to do with my father. I just know that I don't want to deal with it and that I want it to end. I was camping with my friends. Some of us remember what happened that night differently. The fire crackled softly as we sat in a circle, the darkness of the forest pressing in around us. I glanced at my friends, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. It was our annual camping trip, a tradition we had kept since high school. This year we had chosen a remote spot deep in the woods, far from the nearest town. Everything had been going smoothly until that night. Do you guys remember what happened? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with unease. I frowned, trying to piece together the fragmented memories. I remembered the fire, the laughter and the drinking. But after that, things got hazy. We were telling ghost stories, right? I said, hoping someone could fill in the blanks. Yeah, Mark replied, but he didn't sound sure. We were, but then. I don't know. It's like I blacked out or something. Tom, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. I remember, he said, his voice low. There was something in the woods. My heart skipped a beat, a cold wave of dread washing over me. Flashes of the night surged back into my mind, shadowy figures slipping between the ancient trees, their movements fluid and unnatural. The wind carried faint, haunting whispers that seemed to come from all directions, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. An overwhelming sense of dread had settled over me like a suffocating shroud, making it hard to breathe. Each memory felt surreal, like fragments of a terrible dream that couldn't possibly be real, yet the fear they evoked was all too tangible. What did we see? I asked, my mouth dry. Tom's eyes darted to the dark woods surrounding us. I know the feeling it gave me. Sarah shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. I thought it was just a nightmare. A nightmare we all had in unison. I don't think so, Tom insisted, his voice trembling. A silence fell over us, the only sounds the crackling fire and the distant rustling of leaves. The fear in our eyes was unmistakable, but there was something else, confusion, like our memories were fragmented pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Wait, Mark said suddenly. Didn't we run? I remember running through the woods, trying to get away. I remember that too, I said, the memory surfacing. Branches whipped against my face, the ground and even beneath my feet, the sensation of being chased. But we didn't all run, Sarah said, her voice trembling. Some of us stayed behind. A cold chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I saw you, Jack. You were standing by the fire, talking to it. Like you were in a trance. That's not possible, I said, shaking my head. I was with you guys. We all ran together. Tom's face went pale. No, she's right. I remember that too. You were saying something to it. Panic surged through me. But that's not what happened. I insisted. I was with you guys. Then how do we all remember it differently? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We sat in stunned silence, the fire casting eerie shadows around us. I could feel the weight of the conflicting memories pressing down on me, each one as real as the other but impossible to reconcile. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the darkness. We all froze, our eyes darting to the edge of the firelight. A figure stood just beyond the reach of the flames, tall and unnaturally thin. The details were obscured by the shadows, but there was something familiar about its posture, its presence. It's back, Tom whispered, his voice trembling. Who's back? Sarah responded. I don't know, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah clutched my arm. We need to leave. Now. Before we could react, the figure emerged from the shadows and stepped into the flickering light of the fire, revealing a face that sent a chill down my spine. It was me, or at least it looked like me. But there was something off, something inherently wrong about the way it moved and the expression etched on its features. Its eyes, once mirrors of my own, now glinted with an unsettling darkness, devoid of any trace of humanity. They locked onto mine with a predatory intensity, and a sickening smile spread across its lips, a twisted, malevolent grin that sent a shiver down my spine. The resemblance was uncanny, yet there was an undeniable aura of menace emanating from this doppelganger, as if it were a distorted reflection of my worst fears and darkest desires come to life. Some of us remember it said, its voice a chilling echo of my own. Some of us don't. My friends screamed, the sound piercing the night, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The creature lunged forward and the world went black. When I opened my eyes, I was back by the fire. My friends were gone, the forest eerily silent. The memories of what happened, of what was real, swirled in my mind, indistinguishable from each other. I was alone, but I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness. As I stood up, disoriented, I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. My friends emerged from the shadows, looking as confused and terrified as I felt. What happened? Mark asked, his voice shaky. We quickly gathered our things, the sense of urgency palpable. As we packed up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching us, waiting. We navigated through the dense woods, the path a barely discernible ribbon in the dim light of dawn. The forest seemed alive, closing in around us with an oppressive, almost sentient presence. Tall, gnarled trees whispered secrets we couldn't understand, their leaves rustling with a language of their own. Every snap of a twig underfoot, every rustle of leaves overhead, sent jolts of panic through us, our nerves frayed and on edge. The sky slowly lightened, casting a ghostly pallor over the landscape, and our hearts leaped with relief as we finally glimpsed the edge of the woods. The sight of our cars, silent and waiting like sentinels, brought a rush of hope. We didn't waste a moment, throwing our gear into the trunks with frantic, fumbling hands, our only thought to put as much distance between us and the cursed campsite as possible. The forest's grip seemed to loosen as we sped away, but the unease clung to us, a shadow of the night we couldn't escape. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I saw the tall figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching us with an unnerving stillness. Then it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. We didn't speak much on the drive back. The silence was heavy, each of us lost in our thoughts. When we finally parted ways, promising to keep in touch, I knew things would never be the same. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the past 2 days replayed in my mind. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint knock at my window. My heart pounded as I turned to look, and there, standing outside, was the doppelganger, its expression blank, its eyes empty. It smiled, a twisted reflection of my own face, and mouthed the words some of us remember. What did I stumble upon? What does it want from me? I was bored and went to a dark web chat, but that was a life-changing. I never thought much about the dark web. To me, it was just a spooky corner of the internet, filled with urban legends and exaggerated tales. But last month, my curiosity got the better of me and I decided to explore. I had always been tech-savvy, so accessing the dark web was easier than I expected. I found forums, marketplaces, and bizarre sites that looked like something straight out of a horror movie. But one night, I stumbled upon something that still haunts me, a chat room called The Abyss. The description was cryptic: talk with those who truly see. Intrigued and a bit naive, I clicked the link and entered the chat. The interface was basic, just a black screen with a list of usernames on the side and a chat window in the center. The usernames were Strange, Ibn Shade, Soulseeker, Whispering Void, and they immediately started messaging me. Ibn Shade: welcome, new traveler. What do you seek? Soulseeker: knowledge, power, or perhaps something darker. I hesitated before typing, just curious. What is this place? Whispering Void: this is a place where truths are revealed. But beware, not all truths are meant to be known. I felt a mix of excitement and unease. Before I could respond, a new message appeared. Ibn Shade: would you like to see something truly enlightening? My heart raced as I typed yes. A link appeared in the chat, ominously labeled Enter the Abyss. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. My screen went black, then filled with a montage of disturbing images: old, decaying buildings, people performing strange rituals, faces twisted in terror. It was overwhelming, like a nightmare unfolding before my eyes. When the images stopped, I found myself back in the chat room, but it was different. The usernames had changed to real names: David, Claire, Michael, and my webcam had turned on, displaying my own horrified face in the corner of the screen. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't close the window or turn off my computer. David: now you see. There's no turning back. I frantically tried to unplug my computer, but the screen remained on, showing my terrified expression and the cold, emotionless faces of the others in the chat. Claire: we know where you are. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but it wouldn't turn on. Suddenly, my screen flickered and a new video feed appeared: my own apartment, seen from a perspective I didn't recognize. It was as if someone was inside, watching me. Michael, you invited us in. Now we are everywhere. In a frenzy, I ran to my front door and threw it open, only to be met with the empty hallway of my apartment building. No one was there. I checked every room, every closet, but I was alone. When I returned to my computer, the chat room was gone. My screen was back to my desktop as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. My phone buzzed and I saw a notification for a new email from an unknown sender. Subject: Welcome to the Abyss. Body: We are always watching. I haven't been the same since that night. I moved to a new city, changed my name, even got a new job, but the feeling of being watched never leaves me. Sometimes, I'll catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye or hear a whisper when I'm alone. One night, about a week after I moved, I woke up to the sound of my computer booting up. I had left it off, but there it was, the screen glowing in the darkness. The chat room was back, but now, the names were different: John, Emily, Sarah, all people I had known in my life, all who had passed away. John: Why did you leave us? Emily: You can never escape. Sarah: We are part of you now. I unplugged the computer, but the screen stayed on, showing their faces, twisted in agony and anger. I screamed and threw the computer out of my window, watching it shatter on the pavement below. The screen finally went dark, but the terror remained. I replaced my computer, thinking it would end the nightmare. But then, the text started. Unknown numbers, always the same message: We are watching. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I see them everywhere now, in reflections, in crowds, and my dreams. If you ever find a chat room on the dark web called the Abyss, don't enter it. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I felt someone watching me. I turned around, but no one was there. Quickening my pace, I hurried to my apartment. When I entered, my phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Text: We are here. The lights flickered and the temperature dropped. My breath came out in visible puffs. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, my hands trembling. As I backed into the living room, the shadows seemed to move, coalesce, forming shapes that were almost human. I don't know if it was a hallucination or something worse, but I heard their voices, whispering my name, promising I would never be alone again. I dropped the knife and ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Desperation set in. I decided to document my experience, to warn others. I started typing out this story, but the words are running out. The whispers are too loud now. I can't think. They're here, with me, in the room. If you ever find this post, heed my warning. Do not go looking for the abyss. It will find you, and once it is, there is no escape. I never should have gone to this farmhouse alone. Part 1. My hands are shaking as I write this. I have to document my story in case something happens to me in the next few days. I'm not sure where to begin, but I suppose here is better than anywhere. I've always had this weird feeling, this sensation inside of me that I was older than I actually was. By the time I was 12, my soul felt as though it was 40. By the time I reached 20, I felt like an old woman. I would watch people around my age acting foolish, and I always thought, what a bunch of children. So it was no surprise to anyone that when I turned 21, I left my hometown and college and decided to spend the summer alone by renting an old farmhouse in an insignificant town on the edge of an even more insignificant border. When I told my mother, she had a veritable fit, unable to find the words. She spluttered and raged around me for days before I finally left early one morning to avoid her guilt and frustration with my choices. I was not sure why I craved solitude at such a young age, why I found solace in being alone and removed from society. In high school, I had changed unexpectedly, cutting my long blonde hair short and dyeing it black, getting piercings that my mother loathed and claimed no young lady should have. You see, my mother was raised proper, as she called it. Good family, good husband, and finally a good life. She despised her perfect life being squashed by my alternative looks and feelings of the same world. She just didn't understand me or the world as it changed around her. I felt like I was just a trophy to her and my father, her perfect angel who had been tainted by my own demented thoughts. I never told my parents where I was staying, one last rebellious mission before leaving for a few months, and it took me only a few hours to arrive at the farmhouse where I would be staying for the next few months. The land around the farm was dead or dying, old crops rose out of the dry dusty earth and had turned black and forgotten, as if this land was the example of dreams long forgotten and empty. A single dreary lane connected this desolate farmhouse to the rest of the world. On the outside it was drab and looked as though it would fall apart. It had 2 stories but still seemed cramped and small, as if it were a single floor tied to the ground.
Across from the house, bordering the tall weeds that had reclaimed much of the farmland, stood a maudlin-looking faded red barn, one door propped open in a dejected manner, revealing naught to me but shadows, dust, and a little mystery.
Next to the barn, staked into the ground on an old-looking cross, was a ragged scarecrow. It had drab brown clothing, but its face was oddly realistic, like it was watching me with a disapproving manner. Straw poked through its joints at odd angles, like they were trying to break free from their confines. The scarecrow obviously didn't do its job, as it was covered in no less than 3 crows. I parked my car next to the barn and stepped out into the dusty yard before the farmhouse that I would make my home for the next few months. I checked under the front mat for the key and put it in the lock. With a satisfying click, the door fell inward into the farmhouse. Surprisingly, the inside of the farmhouse was modern, clean, and looked quite inviting. I could smell the fresh paint on the walls, and everything was so white. The realtor had told me she would stop by tomorrow to collect the rent, and she had tried to chat my ear off on the phone about all the renovations she and her son were doing on the place. I sighed with contentment and tossed my bags beside the door. I dug around in my bag and removed my camera, my father's old film shooter as he called it. I had taken up the hobby years ago for what I called capturing the oddity in the world. I explored the small house a little more. The ground floor consisted of a single room and small bathroom with a shower. The bedroom was upstairs and was the only room. The stairs connected directly to the white and pink monstrosity that was the master bedroom. The pillows had laces on them and almost made me gag from the cuteness. There was even cute white lace curtains on the window with little flowers stitched onto them. Out of the only window of the room, I could see the barn and the scarecrow. I aimed my camera at the pair and snapped a photo. From this angle, the scarecrow appeared to be staring straight at me. It stood next to the left side of the barn in a dejected manner, like a chastised child. A shudder involuntarily ran through me at the sight, but I moved on back downstairs. It was getting close to dinner time now, and I had brought some food with me. After a few minutes, I had my dinner on the stove cooking and the crickets chirping outside the open window. As I sat down to eat next to the window, I felt at peace for one of the first times in years. The solitude of this old farm was exactly what I needed. The window supplied a nice breeze that wafted through the place. It smelled of grass, and warm summer nights made me feel at peace. The simple dish of spaghetti with tomato sauce and a glass of wine was all that I needed right here, right now, in this moment. That night I climbed into the frilly laced bed and sunk into the claustrophobic mattress. I felt like Goldilocks in the mama bear's bed, as it was altogether too soft. From my perfumed bed, I had a good view out the window. I had left the porch light on, and it cast an eerie glow across the yard. The barn loomed ominously stalwart against the light of the porch, like it was protecting the shadows from the battering ram of light. The somber scarecrow leaned against the left side of the barn. With a small jump, I thought I saw its arm move slightly. I peered through my camera using the zoom to get a better view of the scarecrow. It was completely still in the night, and I laughed quietly to myself at my silliness. I had always enjoyed horror movies, but there was no chance I was living in one. I settled back into bed and put my camera down. Within a few minutes, I fell into sleep's warm embrace. What felt like only a few minutes later, I sat up in bed. It was still dark out. I could hear crickets chirping through the open window, and I strained my ears for a moment. I thought something had woken me up. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as a cold breeze wafted in through the window. I pulled the frilly blanket up around myself when I heard it. A thud sounded below me, shaking the whole world into silence. The crickets stopped chirping, and my heart felt like it had stopped beating. Someone was in the house. I hadn't locked the door or closed the kitchen window, and now someone was downstairs. A second thud sounded like a boot on the staircase. Then another and another, as something was slowly moving up the stairs towards the room. I don't know why I did it, but something came over me. I wasn't big or especially brave, but my normal cowardice in social situations changed instantly. With a dash, I tore across the room, flicking on the lights, ready to face my attacker, to defend myself against male or female. I would fight, and I would win. But as the lights turned on, ready to strike with my foot, nothing was there. The staircase was empty, and upon further inspection, the entire house was empty. The kitchen window was open, and I shut and locked it securely before checking the door. Nothing. I sat down on the couch, my heart pounding out of my chest, as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I must have still been half asleep, I said aloud to the room in a thinly veiled attempt to calm my nerves. It failed horribly, but I went with it. What else could you do in a situation like that? After locking up the house, I went back up to that frilly four-poster bed in the bedroom and stared out the window. Nothing was in the yard except my car, the barn, and the same old sad-looking scarecrow staring across the yard. Day 2. The next morning, I woke up to the soft light filtering through the lace curtains. Despite the strange events of the previous night, I felt strangely refreshed, as if the morning sun had chased away the shadows that lingered in my mind. I descended the stairs, the wooden steps creaking softly under my weight, and headed to the kitchen. As I brewed a pot of coffee, my mind wandered back to the events of last night. Was it just a figment of my imagination, or was there really someone in the house? Shaking off the unease, I decided to explore the farmhouse in the daylight. I wandered through the room, admiring the modern renovations that clashed with the rustic exterior. The farmhouse had a charm to it despite its eerie surroundings. As I made my way outside, the cool morning air greeted me, and I took a deep breath, letting the serenity of the countryside wash over me. The barn stood tall against the backdrop of the morning sky, and the scarecrow seemed to watch me as I crossed the yard. I approached the barn, curiosity getting the better of me. Pushing open the creaky door, I stepped inside, the musty scent of hay filling my nostrils. The interior was dimly lit, the sunlight filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. I explored every nook and cranny of the barn, but found nothing out of the ordinary. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. In the corner of the barn, hidden beneath a pile of old blankets, was a small wooden chest. My heart racing with anticipation, I lifted the lid of the trunk and peered inside. What I found took my breath away. It was a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age, depicting scenes from a bygone era. They were of a man with his family, 2 young kids and a beautiful young wife. The man had yellow blonde hair, almost like straw in texture, but he smiled so happily with his family. I sifted through the photographs, my fingers trembling with excitement. Who had left these behind and why? Each photograph seemed to tell a story, a glimpse into the past of this forgotten farmhouse. As I sat there, lost in thought, a sudden noise jolted me back to reality. It was the sound of footsteps coming from outside the barn. "Hello." The dreamy voice of a woman called to me from the entrance to the barn. I slammed the lid of the trunk shut, closing the memories up in a flurry as I spun around to be greeted by a quite pretty woman with blonde hair and a pink suit skirt combo. She had bright pink lipstick that seemed to be a permanent fixture on her face, and quite shiny and sparkly blue eyeshadow on her lids. I myself only wore black eyeliner. This woman was like Barbie in her proportions, thin waist, long hair, and large tracts of land, as my father would have said. "Oh, hello," I said simply, always awkward in normal social situations. If she noticed anything odd about me, she breezed over it in an easy manner. Taking me by the shoulders, she led me out of the dusty barn and into the yard. "You must be Polly. We have been waiting a while for you to come. I simply must know what you think of the renovations to the house. Aren't they just to die for?"
The lady said all in one breath, as if she didn't need air to speak.
"Yes, they are quite nice." I started before she cut me off, not in a rude manner but instead in one that she would have continued on even if I had just told her I was not Polly and instead I was a Massachusetts murderer looking for my next victim. "You see, me and my son Eli." "Yes, Eli, you stop lurking in the shadows over there," she said, continuing on as I noticed a younger man leaning up against the barn. He wore simple clothes of jeans and a white t-shirt but had a handsome face. His hair was brown and hung slightly over his eyes. "I hope you don't mind if my son here continues working on some renovations while you stay here. Strictly on the outside of the house, mind you. A fresh coat of white paint would make this little beauty shine. We would have finished by now if not for the accidents," she continued, completely unabashed by my silence. "Sorry. But you are the realtor?" I said, trying to regain my feet under me. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, dear," she said with an affable cackle. Yes, I am Barbara, but all my friends call me Barb. That over there is Eli." "Eli, come say hi," Barb said while her painted talons rested firmly on my shoulder. Eli stomped over, keeping his eyes low in a sort of moody way that actually intrigued me, sort of. When he glanced up at me, I noticed he drank in me from head to toe, and for the first time, I realized what I was wearing. An old rock t-shirt of one of my favorite bands and, of all things, my black pajama bottoms with cartoon bats on them that said Happy Halloween. I felt my face blush crimson as he made eye contact with me. He had very mysterious eyes of blue that seemed to cut right through my soul. "Nice shirt," he said while gesturing to me. His voice was quiet and uncertain, as if he didn't get much practice with the art. Knowing his mother, it seemed highly accurate. "Thanks. Do you like them?" I asked. "Oh, he likes all sorts of things, don't you, Eli? Honestly, you two can gab on forever. But miss, I believe we have a small matter of payment," Barb said, drawing the conversation back to herself. "Of course. "Let me go get it," I said as I went back into the house and retrieved the envelope with the rent money in it. Barb grabbed the envelope in her bright pink talons and snapped a piece of bubblegum between her teeth. With quick fingers, she leafed through the cash, counting it. As she counted, her normal bubbly personality seemed to disappear, giving way to what I gleaned was her true thoughts and feelings before the facade slipped on once again. "McKay, perfect honey, this is the right amount. Now you have my number, so you call if you need anything. Like I said earlier, Eli will stop by from time to time to work on painting the house. I promise you he won't be an imposition, just pay him no mind," Barb said in a sweet voice as she popped her gum in between each word. "Eli, come on, please, I have an appointment in town," Barb said to her son, and they both climbed into a garish pink convertible with jewels hanging from the mirror wrapped in a gold chain. Barb waved one last time as she sped off out of the driveway, covering me in dust as she spun the wheel around. With their departure, I went inside and retrieved my camera. I spent a few minutes shooting a few pictures I thought were worthy. I re-entered the barn and pulled the old trunk out into the sunshine. Inside was only a handful of photos, some old clothes, and what looked like some old heirlooms. A beautifully old candlestick and a few leather-bound books lay at the bottom, covered by an old tablecloth. The tablecloth was a nice white with intricate swirling patterns inlaid around the edges. Why would these things be packed away in here? They were so beautiful. I decided to bring the stuff inside for further inspection. As I lifted the trunk, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move in the tall grass at the edge of the property. I stared for a minute but nothing moved again. I must be getting jumpy being alone like this. After last night and then this, I was just imagining things. I brought the items inside and spread them out. I put the tablecloth on the table and it hung low to the ground. I placed the candlestick by the window and took out the photos again, spreading them out. The photos told me a story of a loving family that obviously lived in the farmhouse before me. They had a photo next to the barn, with a brand new looking scarecrow in the back. The man even had his arm around it. It looked so much cleaner and proper in this photo. I stared outside at the sad looking scarecrow. I took my camera and the photo and went outside to stand next to the scarecrow. His post hung kind of crooked in the earth like it was weighed down by the scarecrow. I snapped a photo of the scarecrow as it was, then examined the original photo. I began resettling the post in the ground, but it kept sagging. I decided to pull him out of the ground and move him while I added more dirt to his hole. With some effort, I reseated him into his original hole. He already looked better, but I straightened his clothes and pulled out the last bits of straw that stuck out of his clothes. When I was finished, I looked back at him and took a photo, smiling while I did so at my work. I then spent some time sweeping the front porch and banging the dust out of the cushions before I curled up on a wicker chair with plump cushions for a few hours reading a book I had brought with me. I felt quite content at this place. The sounds of the crickets began again, putting me at ease as the sun began to descend. I had spent the entire day just relaxing and it was perfect. I sat sprawled out in the chair, too lazy to go and make dinner or even move. My bladder was full, but I waited until the last moment before dashing inside and relieving myself. That's when I noticed it, out in the yard. It seemed as if the scarecrow had moved closer. Once shrouded by the barn slightly, it now had moved a few steps into the light from the porch. My heart dropped at the sight. Not again, I must be asleep on the porch in the chair. I pinched myself, trying to wake up, but all I received was a sore arm. I closed my eyes, then rubbed them, hoping to dispel whatever plagued my mind, but when I opened my eyes, I noticed the scarecrow was even closer. Halfway across the yard now, it sat menacingly, hanging crooked in the dirt. The scarecrow seemed to be staring at me with an intense gaze. The slits in its face were open now, and in the porch light, I swore I could see human eyes underneath the mask. I moved towards the front door, locking it in a swift motion. I was shaking now, and it took me a minute to relax. I never took my eyes off the scarecrow for fear of it moving again. My cell phone was upstairs, so I couldn't flee without the scarecrow moving again. I breathed out slightly and unlocked the door, letting it swing in with a creak. The night outside was silent, as if everything was holding its breath. The usual crickets that plagued me with their song day and night had fallen quiet. I stepped out onto the porch. I needed to go confront this demonic entity. Something about this still made me think this was a prank. "Eli, is that you?" I called out to the scarecrow. No response, of course. I steeled myself and put one foot off the porch, never taking my eyes off the scarecrow before me.
Something seemed to be dripping from its head as I approached, a dark slime that seemed to be melting from its joints as it stood there silently, except for the constant drip of the liquid on the dry dirt before me.
I walked around the scarecrow, determined to figure out what was going on. As I circled it, my vision darkened for a moment as I faced towards the light of the house. I jumped as the scarecrow's head turned to face me as I looked away. The black liquid drained faster from the being, forming a shallow pool at its feet. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I fled, taking my eyes off the scarecrow. I made a mad dash for the farmhouse. Behind me, I could hear the pounding of feet. I screamed as loud as my lungs would let me. My voice rang through the silence as I grabbed the door handle and wrenched open the door as I felt a strong grip fall on my shoulder. I turned to defend myself, but nothing was there. The scarecrow was gone, the wooden cross had vanished, as had the pool of dark liquid in the dirt. The world sprung back to life, the crickets began chirping loudly, and my heart restarted. I slammed the door and the air from my force scattered the photographs on the table. I ran upstairs, leaving the lights on in the house, and dove onto the bed, wrapping myself in the frilly blanket like a set of frilly armor. I snatched my camera from the bedside table and held it close, determined to document the rest of the night. I held it in shaking hands as the noise downstairs began, the sound of boots crossing the floor to the stairs and the careful but heavy steps of ascension as they climbed closer and closer to me. This time, I didn't lunge forward as the light was already on. I glanced out the window, but the scarecrow was still gone. I focused my camera on the stairs and waited as the steps came closer and closer. A shape began to form as the head of whatever was coming up the stairs crested the floor. Then a plain brown mask with slits where the eyes would be. It froze for a moment, then slowly turned its head towards me. Inside the slits were human eyes that seemed to be leaking dark red blood. In the light I could see it now. I snapped a photo of the beast, the flash setting off a reaction in the beast. The scarecrow moved so fast up the stairs it was a blur. My scream echoed throughout the house as it lunged at me. Filthy hands pinned me down and the deep crimson liquid began pouring out of every joint of the scarecrow. It began covering my face, my eyes, and getting into my open mouth. I spluttered and kicked at the beast, but my blows had no purchase, as if the scarecrow on top of me had no substance to itself. I coughed and spluttered on the liquid as it began to fill my mouth faster and faster. I tried not to swallow any, but it tried to find purchase as I was held down. Polly. A nervous voice called from below. Suddenly, as if the angels had called, the pressure dissipated and I crashed to the floor in a heap, trying to spit the blood out, but nothing came, it was gone. Footsteps pounded up the stairs again and I flew back in fear, closing my eyes. Oh my God. Polly, are you okay? A voice said, and gentle hands grabbed my arm. My eyes shot open at the human touch and I grabbed Eli into a tight hug where I promptly began sobbing in fear, my whole body shaking as Eli awkwardly hugged me. Don't worry, it's going to be okay, Eli said patiently to me as he hugged me back gently and began stroking my back. I shivered in a choking sob and fell in. I never should have gone to this farmhouse alone. Part 2. Day 3. I woke the next morning from the sunshine in my eyes. My head was resting ever so slightly on Ellie's arm as we had both fallen asleep on my bed after I begged him to stay. I blanched in horror at the drool stain I had left on the arm of his white t-shirt. I began to slowly move myself and retreat downstairs as the memories of the night before came flooding back. How I had broken, screaming in terror, and how Eli had saved me, not knowing the true reason he found me curled up on the floor crying. As I stepped off the bed, my leg got snagged in the frilly bed cover and I went crashing to the ground, making quite the noise as I landed. With a yawn, Ellie's eyes opened and I felt myself blushing as he turned to look at me. We both kind of stared at each other for a moment, not speaking. Eli opened his mouth, then closed it again as if unsure of what to say. Coffee? I asked quickly, filling the awkwardness of our situation. Please, Eli said, smiling. In minutes I had a pot brewing as I leaned against the kitchen counter. Eli was picking up the scattered photographs from the floor and looking at them quizzically. Why do you have pictures of the Harmons? Eli asked, showing me the photos of the yellow-haired man and his family. Is that their names? I found them out in the barn under a blanket, I answered as I rooted around the cupboards for 2 mugs. In the barn. I cleaned it out just last week. No way I would have missed this trunk, Eli said while examining the wooden trunk with its simple rustic hinges. It was plain and unadorned with any embellishments. Basic as basic could be. Well, you must have missed it because it was there, I said, putting emphasis on the was in a way that reminded me of my mother chastising my father. That's so weird, he said, shifting through the photos while sitting at the table. I brought him a cup of coffee and sugar and he began absent-mindedly adding a lot of sugar to his coffee. About 6 scoops later he began stirring and sipping it. Well, anyways, thanks for coming last night. I wasn't myself. I hope you know that I'm not some damsel in distress, I said quickly, like word vomit, and I even chuckled at the end, feeling like a total weirdo. What happened anyway? You didn't say last night, he said, putting the photos down in a jumble on the table. I paused for a moment, considering how to answer. As I sipped my coffee, I stared out into the yard beside the barn where the scarecrow stood, glancing around the edge of the barn, hanging limply in his hole. His appearance once again sad and dejected instead of murderous and terrifying. I was just scared. I had a nightmare and it just scared me, I said dumbly, trying not to turn crimson again under his intense gaze. His eyes seemed to cut right through my lie, as if he were staring directly into my being before he simply glanced away out the window. We fell silent again, and I filled some moments by sipping my drink. It seemed to revitalize me. The sun and the company made me feel secure. Why were you here anyways? I asked after a moment. I heard screaming, so I came running. I live just on the other side of the grass there, behind the barn, Eli said, pointing to the barn out the window. Must be really close. I didn't see any houses on the way in, I said, prying deeper into the situation. It's actually a trailer, maybe like 200 yards from here. I was outside getting some air when I heard you scream. So I came running, Eli said, finishing his cup of coffee and placing it in between us like a barrier, as if he was hiding something. Could you, not do that? Eli asked with an uncertain grin on his face. What am I doing exactly? I asked, startled for a moment, my stomach doing a sort of flip. It's just that you like stare at people. You've been staring at me for like my whole cup of coffee. I don't think you blinked the whole time, Eli said, averting his eyes shyly. No, I don't, I said until I realized he was right. I never noticed that about myself. Right, well, I've got to go. I am probably going to start painting today, so you might see me in a bit, Eli said, rising and heading to the door. Wait, I said, grabbing his arm for only a moment before releasing it like it was scalding hot. Eli glanced at my hand for a moment, then at his arm before he, too, blushed crimson. I just wanted to say thank you again. For last night, I mean. Well, what I mean is I appreciate it, I said, my eyes downcast in, for some reason, shame. Like he had seen me at my weakest and it weighed on my gaze appropriately. It was nothing, besides I didn't get much sleep with your constant snoring, Eli said, laughing at me. I so don't snore, I said, swatting at him but unable to control a smile creeping up onto my face. After Eli left, I felt instantly colder, my eyes kept returning to the scarecrow. I grabbed my camera from upstairs and went out to the yard. I scanned the dirt for anything out of the ordinary. There was no blood or anything on the dirt where the scarecrow stood just last night. I slowly made my way to the scarecrow, but nothing happened. I snapped a photo of the inanimate object and it didn't even flinch. I poked it, but all I felt was straw underneath its clothes. I removed its mask, expecting a severed head, but it was just straw. Nothing was here but straw. I dropped the mask on the ground and took another photo, proving it was just straw and nothing else. An idea struck me as I regarded the source of my torment. If I planned to stay even one more night here, I needed to do something about this scarecrow. I rooted around in the barn. A series of tools hung from nails in the wall. On one hung what I was searching for. An old rusted shovel with a dirty wooden handle that was worn smooth from use. I returned to the side of the barn beside the scarecrow, knowing for whatever reason this thing only came when night fell and didn't react at all when I moved or touched it during the day. Before my morning coffee had even settled, I began to dig at the dusty earth. Loose and easy to dig, it came away in shovelfuls. Within an hour, I had a fair-sized hole in front of me. Sweat dripped from my brow, and when I wiped under my eyes, they came away black from last night's makeup. Glancing at the field of grass and knowing Eli could appear at any time, I decided to head inside and shower.
The hot water was a godsend, and I lingered for longer, letting the water drain down my head and back, my eyes closed, trying to forget the images from the last 2 nights.
I should just pack up my car and leave right this minute. But how could I explain this to my family? I decided to go through with my plan and bury the scarecrow. I could last one more night if I prepared for it. I left the shower and dressed modestly in another one of my old rock t-shirts and a pair of shorts. I returned to the yard and with a satisfying push, I dropped the scarecrow into the pit. It fell with a knee stud and I smiled at my power over it in the day. It's just at night when I should fear it. As I threw the first shovel of dirt back on top, I heard a noise in the grass and it parted, revealing Eli wearing the same pair of jeans and work boots, but he had changed his shirt to a plain black one. In each hand, he held cans of paint and a brush. Should I even ask why you are burying that old scarecrow? He asked as he came to stand beside me. Probably best if you didn't, I admitted, leaning on the shovel. Well, I'm going to anyway. Polly, why are you burying that old scarecrow? He asked, a rare smile coming to his face. Because it's been haunting me at night, I said bluntly. Yeah, okay. Fine, don't tell me. I've been meaning to get rid of it anyway, but normal people take things to the landfill, Eli said with a smirk as he turned to the house and began setting up for his painting. I finished burying the scarecrow and stomped the dirt down flat. I finished my job by moving my car and parking it directly over top of the spot where I buried it. Eli watched me curiously but didn't remark. I returned the shovel to the barn and went out into the yard. I decided to go for a hike around the property. I needed some time alone to think and unwind. As I made my way through the grass, it began to confuse me. This had obviously been a large farmland, but how had the wild plants grown in such a thick, endless maze of greenery?
It gave me an eerie feeling, like I was being watched as the grass covered 3/4 of my body, like there would be something lurking out in the grass, crouched low, waiting for me.
After a half hour or so, I came upon a clear lake, only big enough to be considered an old swimming hole, I thought as I dipped my hand into the cool water. I took off my outer clothes and decided to go for a swim. I lowered myself in slowly and reveled at the cool water. The pond wasn't deep, but the water was clean. A small rope swing had been hung from a large oak tree that bordered the pond. It also provided a nice layer of shade that made it the ideal spot to spend the day. I floated on my back in the water for what seemed like hours. The day seemed to slip away from me. A small beach of sand sat at one side of the pond, so I lay out in the sun and closed my eyes. The warm day warmed my soul, and soon I felt myself drifting off into sleep. I awoke to the sound of crickets and darkness. I couldn't believe it. I had slept through the day, the long nights had finally caught up to me, and now I was stuck far away from the farmhouse. I didn't know if my plan with the scarecrow had worked, and this wasn't the place to test my theory. A full moon lay overhead, casting a silvery glow on the world before me. A sea of grass swayed gently in the wind, sending shivers down it in shuddering waves. I looked around, but I was thankfully alone, just the crickets chirping along melodically as my only companions. I had to make it back to the house, so I started on my way, my hands trailing along the tall grass. The pale light played easily on the deep green grass. Step by step, I made my way back towards the farmhouse and the barn, throwing caution to the wind, and I started to jog along, anything to get back faster. I would have to find Eli, maybe if we were together, he could stop it like before. If I thought the field was creepy during the day, by night it was a whole new world. Every sound made my heart stop for a beat before restarting in protest. When all of a sudden the crickets stopped chirping. I dropped to my knees, letting the long grass cover me from sight. Through the strands, I could make out a shape moving slowly through the tall grass, the swish of the plants as it made its passage through them. My heart dropped. Was this Eli looking for me, or was it the scarecrow come for me? That's when I heard a voice cutting through the silence. It started off quiet and raspy as it sang an eerie children's song. Did you come for me? Run and hide, don't you know that I seek the world it claims that I be not clean. When I come, you'll see how filthy I can be. Tonight it is happening, tonight you'll see. Beneath the moon, my shadows they do creep. In this world, at night I shall be free. Tonight it's happening, tonight you'll see. When I come, you had better flee, or else I'll come and give my filth to thee. I was frozen to the spot. It hadn't found me, but it knew I was in the grass somewhere. Now, with each word, chewed up and spat out like it was unhappy with it, now it was accompanied by the whistle of something in the air and a slicing sound as it cut through the grass around me. It finished another round of its song, but now it stood within feet of me, its blade whistling as it cut. I took a moment to ready myself, and as it raised its blade to cut through the grass I hid in, I dashed out of my hiding spot and slammed into it. But nothing resisted me, I fell through it like it was a ghost. In a tangle of limbs, I landed hard on the ground and tried quickly rolling to my feet. The blade of its weapon pierced the earth beside me. Now I could see it was a two-handed scythe the scarecrow carried, but something was off, its hands were human. Pale milky skin like a newborn baby. I had little time to examine the creature except for the canvas bag over its head. Two large black eyes came out of the slits that leaked a dark red blood like tears. It screeched loudly and swung its scythe, but it was slow, and I took off through the grass in the direction of what I hoped was the farmhouse. I completely gave up all pretense of hiding and sprinted as fast as I could without looking back. The grass seemed to part for me as I ran in terror. I was just glad that in high school I had taken track, as it was paying off now. I could hear the noise of footsteps behind me, but I never turned. I ran and ran until my lungs felt like they were going to burst. Something silver flashed to my left and I tripped over something hard and unexpected. The wind was driven from my lungs as my chin slammed hard into the earth. I scrambled back, trying to escape, but the scarecrow was on me, its blade flashing angrily in the pale moonlight. I wanted to move, I wanted to fight, but my body was weak and unable to catch its breath, and I lay there helpless as it swung its scythe towards me. I closed my eyes in fear, but I only heard the thud of dirt before I opened my eyes. The scythe was discarded and the scarecrow stood staring at me.
It seemed to be struggling with something. One hand reached out towards me only to be snapped back to its side.
A roar of rage pierced the canvas sack over its head as it struggled against its invisible bonds. For a moment I thought I saw something behind it, 3 sets of hands holding it back. One feminine in nature and the other 2 must have belonged to children. In a flash, I saw a beautiful woman who looked vaguely familiar with her long brown hair and plain dress. "Run," she moaned as the scarecrow swung around wildly. I didn't hesitate and fled. My breath had returned, and while my body still ached from my fall, I powered on, knowing this was the only respite I would receive tonight. In the distance, I could see a small sheet metal shape. Ellie's trailer was slowly coming closer as I ran, and I beelined it for the trailer. I could hear the footsteps behind me again as the scarecrow resumed its chase after me. I reached the old trailer and banged on the door as loud as I could. I rattled the handle, but it was locked. "Eli, it's me. It's Polly, please let me in. Please," I begged as I banged over and over again on the door of his trailer. Nothing responded to me and the trailer was dark. The single window in the back held no life inside the trailer. From the trailer I couldn't tell which direction the farmhouse was in the dark, so I fled into the tall grass and crouched low, watching the clearing around the trailer. While I caught my breath, I watched the scarecrow enter the clearing, its scythe back in its hand as it circled the trailer. When its raspy voice began singing again, low and quiet, only loud enough for me to hear. Did you come for me? Run and hide, don't you know that I seek the world it claims that I be not clean? When I come, you'll see how filthy I can be. Tonight it is happening, tonight you'll see. Beneath the moon, my shadows they do creep. In this world at night I shall be free. Tonight it's happening, tonight you'll see. When I come, you had better flee, or else I'll come and give my filth to thee. The song made me shiver uncontrollably at the lyrics and the voice. It sounded demented, like a crazy person letting their demons out into a nursery rhyme. I lay perfectly still. For some reason it couldn't find me. This creature I assumed was all-knowing seemed to have some very human weaknesses. It moved and talked like a human, even had certain body parts that were from a human. It even felt human the way it chased and reacted. The scarecrow moved on through the tall grass and I let out a sigh of relief as it lost my trail. How terrifying that beast was. In my pocket was the keys to my car. Eli had told me that the farmhouse was fairly close to his trailer. I had to navigate to the car, then drive as fast as I can away from this place. The fact that I hadn't left already because I was worried about money was insane. Who cares, I could drive to Barb's and demand my money back. Go home and just tell my parents the truth. The whole reason for actually leaving home this summer, why I was actually here in this field shivering uncontrollably in fear. But I couldn't think about that now, not now. There will be time to deal with that later. Now I needed to focus on staying alive, getting to the car and getting out of here. I went in the direction the scarecrow had. He knew the land better than I did, and every noise I made in the silence of the night made my heart drop. It took all my courage there and then to take one step forward, then another.
I felt like I was going to be sick. My stomach was in knots to where it felt like even if I was sick, the only thing to come out would be only bile and stomach acid. With each careful step, I made my way closer to the farmhouse and the scarecrow. Through the darkness, I could see my goal, the farmhouse and the barn. Within minutes, I had made it securely to the farmhouse yard. My car still sat in the same spot over top of the hole where I buried the scarecrow. In the moonlight, I could see that the dirt had not been disturbed. The scarecrow was nowhere to be seen, and I cautiously made my way to my car, my keys in my hand as I approached the driver's door. I hadn't locked the car and it opened on the first try. I turned on my car as quietly as I could, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Something landed heavily on top of the roof of my car, making it dent inwards slightly. With horror, I saw the scarecrow swing its scythe into the back window of my car. With a crash, the glass shattered inwards. I put my car into gear and roared away down the lane. In my rearview mirror, I couldn't see anything, so I swerved back and forth, trying to shake the creature from the roof of my car when the scythe crashed in through the front window, making a hole just large enough for it. The glass spittered and I couldn't see out the window very well. I swerved down the road, but the scythe remained in the car, allowing the creature purchase.
In a panic, I spun my wheel wildly, trying to dislodge it, but I lost control, and soon felt something crash into the front of my car. The airbag went off in my face and I hadn't been wearing my seatbelt. I slammed hard into something else and my vision went dark. I was in a daze. I must have passed out because I don't remember a lot of what happened next. I felt the car door open with a crunching tear and it landed loudly as it was torn off. My body being grabbed and tossed on the ground. I felt no pain, just a gentle numbness. I felt blood on my head as I raised my arm to touch my face. Then just blackness, complete and empty, just feelings, fear and eased sadness. My eyes opened and the scarecrow was over top of me. Pain on my chest and my vision went dark again. Coughing as something poured down my throat. I couldn't breathe. Why couldn't I breathe? My eyes opened one last time and I saw the scarecrow pouring a dark liquid from its mouth directly into my mouth and eyes. My vision was red and bloody before I closed them one last time. The words of its song echoed into the emptiness of my thoughts. Did you come for me? Run and hide, don't you know that I seek the world it claims that I be not clean? When I come, you'll see how filthy I can be. Tonight it is happening, tonight you'll see. Beneath the moon my shadows they do creep. In this world at night I shall be free. Tonight it's happening, tonight you'll see. When I come you had better flee, or else I'll come and give my filth to thee. The darkness enveloped me and I felt myself slipping away, the sounds of the night fading into oblivion. Day 4. When I awoke it was morning and I found myself lying in a hospital bed. My head throbbed with pain and my body ached all over. The memories of the terrifying night flooded back to me and I shuddered involuntarily. A nurse entered the room, her kind eyes filled with concern. You're awake, she said softly, her voice gentle like a soothing balm. You're lucky to be alive. You were found unconscious by the side of the road next to your car. Do you remember what happened? I tried to speak but my throat felt raw and dry. I croaked out a few words, barely audible. The scarecrow. It attacked me. The nurse frowned, her brows furrowing in confusion. Scarecrow? What scarecrow? My heart raced with panic as I realized the truth. Had it all been a nightmare? But the pain in my body felt too real, the memories too vivid to be mere hallucinations. I tried to explain, to tell her about the terrifying creature that had pursued me through the night, but she only looked at me with concern, as if I were delusional. I'll get the doctor, and there is a young man who brought you in. He has been here all morning, the nurse said with a sly wink. After a few minutes she came back with Eli and a doctor, both of whom smiled gently at me through the window. The doctor came in first and went over my health with me. I had a concussion and bruises all over my body. A generous-sized cut from some glass on my scalp had been stitched and bandaged. My mind flashed back to the night before. How the scarecrow had filled me with its gooey red blood. Did you find anything else? I asked cautiously, trying to avoid another scandal like with the nurse. No, as long as you have someone to pick you up and take you home, you are free to go. That nice young man out there said he would take you back home, the doctor said, pointing to Eli as he rose with a slight grunt. I glanced at Eli and he waved uncertainly at me. The doctor went out and began talking to Eli for a few minutes. While I waited, my mind began to have strange thoughts. Something was wrong, I felt weird. My vision turned red and I began to see images before my eyes. The Harmons. They flashed before my eyes in real time, the husband hugging his wife, then swinging his kids around, chopping wood out back next to the barn while his wife cooked in the kitchen. As Eli entered the room, the vision stopped suddenly. Like my saving angel for the third time now, I was extremely grateful to Eli. Hi, Eli said, elongating the word in a sort of familiar yet awkward way. Hi, I said, closing my eyes and letting my embarrassment pass in only a few seconds. Why is it that 50% of the times we meet, you're in serious trouble? Eli asked, coming to sit on the edge of my bed. So you know me, bad luck, I guess, I said simply, becoming aware that under my blankets I was in a backless hospital gown and he was inches away from me. I pulled the blanket up to my chin as a sort of cover for my appearance, but Eli didn't seem to notice. He continued talking to me. It was actually really sweet the way he seemed to care for me. Anyways, the doctor said I could take you back to the farmhouse to rest, Eli said. No, I said suddenly, becoming serious. What? Why not? Eli asked. I just can't right now. I'll tell you later. We can't spend the night anywhere near the farm, I said, grabbing him by the arm, hoping to sway him. Well, I mean, if you want, we can grab your stuff and my house can literally go anywhere, Eli said in an offhand manner, as if he had expected this. Promise? I asked, trying not to seem too afraid. Within the hour, we had returned to the farmhouse. The whole IDUB was still covered over, and I stared at it as we parked in Ellie's black pickup truck. I ran inside and quickly got changed into my only clean clothes, grabbing everything I had from the farmhouse. I paused at the dinner table, looking down at the photographs of the Harmons and thinking back to that weird moment in the hospital with that odd vision. The day was getting longer and I hurried back to Eli, waiting in the pickup truck. I threw my bag in the back and climbed in beside him. He smiled and backtracked down the lane. We turned to the left and went down a side road where we came upon my poor old car. It had crashed directly into a tree and the whole front part of the car had been destroyed. Fluid leaked all over the road and I almost shed a tear for my departed friend. We had traveled far together. I grabbed a few things from the car, but something was off about the car. The front door had been knocked off and was discarded on the far side of the road. It looked impossible, the door hadn't even hit the tree. Eli hooked his truck up to his trailer and we sped off, leaving the property behind us. We headed into town and found a pullout on the side of the road with a set of bathrooms to camp at for the night. Ellie's trailer was messy but cozy. He had laundry strewn over most surfaces, but it didn't smell bad. The room consisted of a small kitchen with a bed in one corner. There were also a lot of posters and artwork on the walls. I examined one of a pretty girl with long raven black hair. It was a realist painting, obviously taken from real life. "Who is this?" I asked as Eli made us some food. "That is just a friend," Eli said, glancing at the painting he had done. "Well, she is a pretty friend," I said, enjoying watching the back of his ears turn bright red. "Dinner's ready," he said, pouring the mixture of food he had made onto a pair of plates. Eli served me and handed me a can of Coke to drink. I thanked him and sat on his bed. It was the only serviceable piece of furniture in the whole trailer. We both sat in silence for a moment while we ate. I could tell something was bothering Eli as he kept making glances toward me. What is it, Eli?" "Just say it," I said between bites. "Tell me what happened, Polly. Tell me why you were burying the scarecrow, why you were passed out in the road with straw in your hair. Tell me why you were muttering about the Harmons and a scarecrow when I found you," Eli said suddenly, as if he were unloading a machine gun. I looked Eli square in the face and relented. I told him about the last couple of nights at the farmhouse, about how the scarecrow had been tormenting me every night. About how he had saved me and how last night I had fled through the fields to his trailer and then to my car. I told him about the vision I had about the Harmons in the hospital. By the end of it, I was in tears. I felt so foolish and childish. Eli took it in stride. He asked a few questions during my retelling, but by the end of it, he was silent. Tears fell down my face and landed in my lap. We had both put our plates on the counter and Eli hugged me. He put his arms around me and I nuzzled into his shoulder, feeling comforted again in him at the lowest points of my life. With a gentle hand he wiped away my tears and I smiled, letting a nervous laugh escape my lips. I looked up into his face and felt his stare before I saw it. His pale blue eyes shone with comfort and then his lips were on mine as he kissed me quickly before pulling away slightly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. That was insensitive of me. You're sad and I took advantage of that," Eli said, moving back slightly. "Shut up," I said and grabbed his shirt, bringing him back in. There's an abyss even deeper than the Mariana Trench. Ready to make history, baby? I looked over toward Sheila as she stood on the gangplank leading up to the burger. I still can't believe she named our research ship the Burger. Emotional relevance be damned. It's not exactly history, I corrected. Oh come on. If your survey is right, this trench might run even deeper than the Challenger Deep, and you're gonna be the first person to explore it. How is that not exciting? Might be deeper, we only have a limited amount of topological data. And even if it is deeper, we're talking only a few hundred feet at most, it's really not that dim. Sheila silenced me with a kiss. Nerd. She teased and I found myself too flustered to reply. After 5 years of marriage, she still could leave me speechless with just a kiss. God, how did someone like me end up with a woman like that? Then again, how did someone like me end up where I was in general? It was honestly a little overwhelming. Standing on the dock, getting ready to board the ship and join the ranks of Jacques Piccard and James Cameron, yes, that James Cameron, as one of the few people to take a manned submersible down to the deepest parts of the ocean. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little scared too. Diving down that deep could easily be a one-way trip if even the slightest thing went wrong. My submarine would be experiencing between 600 to 1100 atmospheres of pressure, and while we detested it over and over again to make sure it would actually be up for the challenge, there was still a lingering iota of doubt in the back of my mind. All that needed to go wrong was one little thing, and that would be it for me. The scariest part is that I probably wouldn't even know what had happened. I'd simply be gone and Sheila would be alone. The thought of that caused a momentary spike of panic in my chest that almost made me want to call this whole thing off. Almost. But then I felt her hand close around mine. I looked up into her bright blue eyes and saw her gentle smile. "You're gonna be okay, hun," she promised. "You and your team have been running the numbers, right? It is gonna go just fine." I nodded slowly. "It is gonna go fine," I repeated, before she leaned in to kiss me and gently pulled me by the wrist up onto the deck of the Burger. She was probably right. It probably would be fine. Probably. The trench I'd be exploring was a fairly recent discovery, located south of Greenland and a vast stretch of water situated directly between Newfoundland and Iceland. It'd been uncovered during a topological survey in the area, and my team had taken an interest in investigating it further. At minimum, it was believed to descend to about feet deep over meters, although the current theory was that it might have run even deeper. Determining the exact depth of the yet unnamed chasm was just one of the intents of our dive. The rest was studying the organisms that might be found down there and how they might have differed from the ones found in other deep ocean trenches, some variation being expected given the isolated environment they were developing in. I had to admit it would be exciting to see what new life might have developed in a place such as this, especially if it ran even deeper than our predictions, and that excitement was enough to make me chase the fear of the risks out of my mind, even if it was only briefly.
While Sheila went to make sure we were ready to embark, I caught myself wandering out toward the rear of the ship where my submarine, the Tempura, waited for me.
Did this submarine deserve a better name than the Tempura? Probably. But this was my project, so I got to name it, and since Burger was already taken, Tempura was the next best name I had. I like to think that the sub's namesake might approve if she hadn't died 15 years ago. Shrimp don't live very long. As the ship began to depart, I caught myself reminiscing on how I'd ended up here. It really was all because of those damn shrimp, wasn't it? Well, maybe not all because of the shrimp. But they were certainly part of it. Back when I was a lot younger, I never really gave much of a shit about anything at all. I guess I did have a thing for the ocean, the great, romantic vastness of it. The sense of adventure that it beckoned with. The endless mysteries that lay within its dark depths.
I used to read about it all the time when I was a kid, and I especially loved the classic adventures, Verne S., Leagues Under the Sea, and Melville S. Moby Dick, but that love was just confined to my books.
I didn't really have any interest in actually going out and seeing the ocean. Hell, the idea of going to a beach and standing in the sun with my toes in the sand seemed miserable to me. I was happier, although calling myself happy might have been a little disingenuous, alone in my room, enjoying the company of books as opposed to people. Then came the shrimp. One of my online friends kept them as a hobby. He used to post pictures of his tanks all the time, and I always thought they looked kinda cool. He said that if I was interested in them, I should try keeping some for myself, and during a particularly bad bout of depression, I figured that maybe it might be worth a shot. So, I bought a cheap tank and some cheap decorations, bought myself some shrimp, and promptly watched them die over the next few weeks. That bothered me. I don't know why, but it really bothered me. I am still not entirely sure how to describe what it was that I was feeling. Guilt? Defeat? Shame? Here I was, trying to set up a habitat for these creatures just to have something to do to keep the suicidal ideation at bay, and I'd failed almost right out of the gate. Was I just that bad? Was I just that much of a failure? Was this just going to go to shit just like everything else in my life did, because I was just such an abysmal piece of shit who barely deserved the life she had? Had I just not tried hard enough? Was I too apathetic? What had happened? What went wrong? It bothered me. It bothered me enough that I made up my mind to just dump the remaining shrimp down the toilet and toss everything. Forget about it. Move on. End of story. But that wasn't fair, was it? The shrimp didn't all deserve to die just because I couldn't be bothered, did they? Sure, they were just shrimp, but they were alive too, just like me. They deserved to be alive. I owed it to them to try and keep them alive, didn't I? So I didn't dump the shrimp. Instead, I started doing some reading. Started looking into what I was doing wrong and how to do it all better. I actually got really into it, and a few months later, I had a niche-planted tank. Looking back, it was amateur shit, but it made me happy. I'd even picked out names for my two favorite shrimp. Burger and Tempura. They'd been the last survivors of my original batch, and they were the ones I ended up caring about the most. Caring for burger and tempura gave me a purpose. It became an obsession, and that little obsession drove me to finally start turning my life around. Like I said, shrimp don't live for very long. Burger and tempura were long dead by the time I graduated with a degree in marine biology. But they were the ones who inspired me to finally get my life in order. Hell, the shrimp were half the reason that I met Sheila. She was something of an aquarium fanatic too. We met on a forum and got into talking. I found out that she just so happened to be studying marine biology at another school, and we bonded pretty quickly after that. After graduation, I moved to California to be with her, and after that the rest is history. She was my rock. She was the one who always pushed me to be the best possible version of myself, and I loved her more than I ever knew I could love someone. A glance back at the shore fading into the distance tore me out of my reminiscing, and I shifted my focus to the present, going over the tempura to perform some quick checks. My colleagues and I would be checking and rechecking the submarine over the next 2 days as we made our way toward the dive spot. Considering the danger that descending the deep posed, I didn't want to take a single unnecessary risk. I had too much to live for, after all. The day of the dive, I called to notice how excited the rest of the crew seemed, while Sheila's usual crew seemed excited. I guess to them, this was just another research expedition, no different than the ones Sheila usually took this ship out on. Lately her research had been focused on the analysis and study of whale calls. Her recent voyages had involved following their pods, recording their calls and playing them back to see how the whales reacted. It was fascinating stuff, but my research was admittedly a lot different than that. My obsession had drawn me to the denizens of the deep sea. I'd used the burger for expeditions before, although none of them had been on quite the same scale as this one. Up until today, the most ambitious thing I'd done was send down unmanned submersibles with cameras. Those submersibles had typically returned. We had lost a few early on due to technical glitches, but the past few years had been blissfully uneventful. Logically, this dive would probably be uneventful as well. But it was still hard to get the jitters out of my head. My team and I did the final checks necessary to make sure that the tempura was good to go, before setting up the crane to begin lifting it up. In less than an hour, I'd be inside of the thing, descending to the darkest depths of the ocean. It didn't feel real. I felt Sheila's hand on my shoulder and looked over at her. Moment of truth, huh? She asked. She probably meant it to sound encouraging, but it just sounded ominous. Moment of truth, I replied. You're gonna be okay, honey. I know you will. She reached out to gently squeeze my hand and gave me a reassuring smile that I meekly returned. Yeah, it is gonna be okay, I agreed, although there was an element of a lie in it. Statistically, yes. It probably would be okay. But there was that lingering anxiety in the back of my mind that just wouldn't go away. I looked quietly out at the submarine before me and couldn't shake the thought that it sort of looked like a giant coffin. Unconsciously, I found myself squeezing Sheila's hand tighter than normal. She just held me close and pressed a kiss to the top of my head before gently rubbing my back. You'll be okay, she promised. Drive. Jenner, we're ready for you. I heard one of my colleagues say. Moment of truth. I took one last look at Sheila and gave her a quick kiss on the lips for luck. She smiled at me and I smiled back anxiously at her before heading over toward the submarine. The crew helped me enter the cockpit and get myself situated inside. The cockpit of the tempura was fairly cramped and not particularly comfortable. Space and comfort aren't really luxuries you can afford in a submarine like this. The instruments I needed took up a lot of space, leaving little room for me in there, and I am not a very big person. Once I was inside, they sealed the hatch. Then the diagnostics checks began. Grayson, can you hear us in there? I heard Sheila say through the radio. Loud and clear, I replied. Great. We'll keep in constant radio contact just to monitor the signal. In the meanwhile, how is everything looking in there? Green across the board so far, I said, although I hadn't finished running all my final checks yet. Ultimately, nothing was out of place. This submarine was as good to go as it was going to get. I am all good in here, I said once I was done. You can drop me when you're ready. You got it, honey. Let us get you in the water, run one final round of tests and start lowering you down. A short while later, I felt the submarine begin to move as the crane lifted it off the deck and lowered it into the water. The tempura honestly resembled its namesake in a way, being long and cigar-shaped, only vertically oriented instead of horizontally oriented. We'd admittedly taken more than a few design cues from James Cameron's Deep-Sea Challenger. Why fix what isn't broken after all? Once I was in the water, a 1,000-pound releasable ballast weight would cause the submarine to sink. Releasing that weight was also my ticket back to the surface, and I could either trigger it from inside the cockpit or in the event that the release failed for any reason, it would trigger automatically after roughly 12 hours of exposure to salt water. Ideally, this would be the first of a number of dives I'd be undertaking, and if all went according to plan, the Tempura could be the first of many similar submarines that would allow other researchers to safely and effectively descend to extreme depths. If all went well, this could be a massive leap forward for researchers like me, allowing us to better explore the deepest depths of the Hadal Zone and learn all we could about the ecosystems down there via direct observation. If all went well. Through the viewport, I watched as I was lowered into the ocean. A few of the other crew members had donned diving gear to escort me down, and after they did their final checks and I did mine, we were fully ready to go. All is green across the board, I said into the radio. You can start my descent. I hear you, honey, Sheila replied. We're letting you go. Have fun down there. Yeah, I'll try, I said quietly as finally, my submarine began its descent. I took a deep breath and told myself again that everything would go fine. We had checked everything on this submarine. We tested it rigorously. I wouldn't have allowed myself to set foot inside of it if I hadn't personally assured that it was safe. But anxiety never really goes away, does it? The crew couldn't accompany me far. After only a few meters, they fell behind me as I sank deeper and deeper into the infinite, empty blue of the ocean. Soon after, the tether was released. I was officially on my own feet, I heard Sheila say over the radio. How are you doing in there? Good, I replied. Doing good. The submarine continued to descend. Through the viewport I could see a few stray fish, but nothing particularly eye-catching. I almost felt alone down there, almost. Feet, Sheila said. Still doing good, I replied. The descent continued as the waters slowly grew darker and darker. Feet. Everything around me just kept getting darker and darker. Only a fraction of the light from the sun ever reached these depths, and I'd be lying if I said the darkness didn't feel a little oppressive. Feet, still feeling good? Yeah, still feeling good, I said, although it was a bit of a lie. If anything, I was second guessing all of this, but I wasn't about to say that out loud. Feet, still good? Still good, I murmured. I hear you loud and clear. Deeper, deeper, deeper. Feet. 3 miles. I was 3 miles away from home. 3 miles away from Sheila. Feet. Still a ways to go. Feet. By this point it was fully dark outside of my cockpit. Outside all I could see was inky darkness. Even the submarine's lights didn't really cut through it. And the kicker? Relatively speaking, I wasn't that deep. Fishing trawlers reached deeper than this. Better to conserve power until I was at the bottom. My descent continued. Feet, still good? Still good. The check-ins were becoming less frequent. My descent still continued deeper, deeper, deeper. By now I'd entered the Hadal Zone. But there was still so much deeper to go. Feet. This was past the depths that most whales would dive to, and I still had a ways to go. Feet. This was close to where the ocean floor usually bottomed out, and yet there was still so much further to go. No. I was really only a third of the way there. How long had it been? Not much had happened beyond my descent and a few sightings out of my viewport, but time had been passing. A glance at my watch confirmed it'd been almost an hour since I'd started to sink, and I knew I wasn't even close to the bottom yet. The submarine continued to descend, sinking ever deeper as I dropped into an infinite darkness that few had ever dared to witness. Feet. This check-in came later than the others. At this point, Sheila and the crew must have figured that no news was good news, and they were right. I just continued to sink peacefully, down into the crushing depths of the ocean. These were the depths that one might normally find deep-sea fish, and yet I was going somewhere even deeper than that. Feet. So close. I continued to sink. Feet. Soon and finally. Feet. You're still doing alright, honey? Yeah, I'm doing good, I assured her. I was so close. By this point, my real work had begun. I'd engaged the lights and begun documenting what little I could see using the onboard cameras. Granted, there wasn't much life at these depths, and what little there was scarcely documented. Most of what was down here consisted of invertebrates and microscopic life that seemed to float past my viewport. The light seemed to draw a few creatures in search of food. Small, hardy things that resembled shrimp. How is it looking, Grayson? Dark, I said, half joking. We've got some live shrimp. They're translucent. Can't get a great look at them, but we'll see what the cameras pick up. They've recognized you as a friend, Sheila said. I could almost see the smile on her lips as she said it. Yeah, I replied. Tempura sent them a message, told them I'd be down. How am I looking on depth? Feet, you see any bottom yet? No, not that I would until I was there. Damn, how deep does this go? It can't go that deep, I murmured, although I really wasn't so sure about that. The submarine continued to sink. Feet. Feet. Feet, and then finally, just past the foot mark, I finally saw solid ground below me. Looking through my viewport, I could see a familiar dark brown diatomaceous sludge covering the sea floor. Microscopic life, likely similar to what had been observed in other deep-sea trenches, such as the Challenger Deep. I needed to gather a sample. As my submarine reached the bottom, I extended the mechanical arms, pressed flat against the surface of the Tempura, and opened the collection port near the bottom of the ship. Slowly, I sifted some of the sludge into the port. My disturbance of the sea floor kicked up a cloud of the microbial colony, and I could have sworn I saw something wiggling through the debris. A pale, white thing, perhaps some sort of sea cucumber. I hastily angled my submarine's camera to try and catch a glimpse of it before returning to my collection. Even in this forlorn place, there was still so much to see. And here I was completely forgetting my fear as the excitement took hold of me. Few people had ever been down to these unfathomable depths, and yet here I was. It didn't feel real, but it was. I had reached the deepest part of the ocean. How is it going down there? I heard Sheila ask. Her voice was a little garbled. The connection down here was faltering. It is beautiful, I said. I can't wait for you to see it. I'll bet. I am going to do a sweep of the area, see what samples I can gather, I said. What is my time right now? 3 hours. You've got 9 before your connection to the weight deteriorates and you start to ascend. I'll make the most of it, I said. The plan was only to stay down there for 6 hours, and I didn't want to push that limit. Life support would only last me for so long, and one little error was all it would take for the ungodly pressure down here to crush me. I began to move the submarine. Mobility was limited. This thing wasn't built to travel far. But I still had some limited movement. I recorded all that I could, filming the shrimp that investigated my light and the things that slithered and crawled through the muck, likely feeding on the carpet of single-celled organisms that populated these depths. The first 2 hours were, well, I hesitate to call them uneventful. They were actually very fascinating, but little of note happened beyond my recording of a few specimens. Midway through the third hour though, as I was reaching one of the rock walls of the abyss, I noticed something just above the edge of my viewport swimming away from the light. I could have sworn I saw slender, pale tentacles of some sort. Was that a squid? Were there squid down this deep? I wasn't aware of any species of known squid who could reach these depths, but in this unknown place, what use was the known? I moved my light and my camera to try and catch another glimpse of it, but whatever it was, it seemed to be gone. Maybe I'd see another one. I still had plenty of time. You made a noise. What do you see? Sheila asked. Something big, I think, I said. Down there. Like a fish? Squid. You wouldn't find any vertebrates down this deep, the pressure would crush their bones. Geez. I didn't reply to that, still searching for the thing I'd seen. I shone my light up along the walls of the chasm and angled my camera up as far as it would go. I could see a few volcanic vents spewing dark clouds into the darkness and more diatoms. But not much else. Strange invertebrates crawled along the walls. Small creatures, no bigger than an inch long. Related to isopods, perhaps? If I could collect one as a sample, I would have, although taking any of those back to the surface would surely kill them. They were built to live under the impossible pressure of these depths. Taking them to the surface would rip them apart. I went back to my research, and it wasn't long until I saw something in the darkness, just on the edge of where my flashlight reached. Trailing white tendrils, snaking their way through the darkness. My eyes narrowed as I moved the submarine forward, trying to catch whatever it was in the light. I saw the shape move, its body turning, I saw its tendrils unfurling. Whatever this was, it was big. It was almost as big as the Tempura, although it was also slender. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought I was looking at some sort of floating debris, but this far down. No. And debris wouldn't move like that. This had to be a deep-sea squid or perhaps some other type of cephalopod. Something that preyed upon the various invertebrates down here, perhaps. It seemed to float, just out of sight for a bit as I tried to get closer. I angled up my light to get a better look at it. The light seemed to shine through it, like some sort of ghost, but I did manage to get a look at it. Although that single look made me freeze up. This thing's slender tendrils certainly resembled a cephalopod of some sort, but the rest of it looked like something else entirely. Its body was thin, emaciated and translucent, yet despite that it still had characteristics that almost seemed human. It wasn't human. Not by any stretch of imagination, but the resemblance was there. It almost reminded me of an exhibit I'd seen in a museum once depicting a preserved, fully removed human nervous system. I could see a similar shape in its translucent body. Its head seemed almost human as well, albeit with no eyes, and a lamprey-like mouth I could only describe as fleshy yet crab-like. Still, despite having no eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was looking at me. And that was when I felt something hit the submarine. I felt a sudden jolt of panic in my chest. For a moment, I thought that the pressure had started to crush me, but no, everything was still fine. Something had just hit me. But what? It didn't take long before I got my answer. Another pale creature floated past my viewport, swirling gracefully in the cold dark waters. I watched it for a moment with wide eyes, before noticing its head turning slightly toward me. Then, almost instantly, it launched itself at the submarine, darting toward me with blinding speed. I heard a distinct thud as its body collided with me, and I could see its pale tendrils pressing against the viewport, twisting and writhing violently. It was trying to attack me. The first creature that I'd seen lunged as well, pounding on my submarine with another thud, and moments later I could hear more impacts against the hull. There were more of them and they did not like having me down there. "What's going on?" Sheila asked. "Somebody doesn't like me," I said. "One of the animals down here, some kind of squid, it has just started attacking the hull." "How bad is the damage?" "Not sure, could be nothing, could be." I felt the submarine shake as I tried to move it. The thrusters that pushed me forward weren't responding. Had something gotten caught in it? One of the creatures perhaps? "Grayson?" Sheila asked. "Lost propulsion," I said. "Fuck, I can't move." "Then drop the weight and come up." "No, it's fine, there's no other damage, I can still use the port and starboard thrusters too." "Grayson." I paused. There was genuine panic in her voice, enough to make me realize that even if these things stood little chance of actually breaching the hull, taking the risk would be a fatal mistake. "I am on my way up," I finally said, before reaching out to disengage the ballast weights. Immediately, I felt myself beginning to rise, although the tentacles clinging to my viewport didn't disappear. "We've got you," Sheila said. Rising up 2 feet. The submarine continued to rise, but the creatures clinging to me went nowhere. In fact, I was sure I could see more of them. More pale shapes coming up through the darkness, and these ones filled me with dread. I thought I had been looking at some sort of eerie undiscovered life. But seeing what was coming up toward me now, I knew that I was looking at so much more. The creatures swimming up toward me through the darkness carried weapons, makeshift stone spears and daggers. Primitive tools, but tools all the same. Signs that these were more than just undiscovered animals. Much more. The word mermaids crossed through my mind, but these were something far different than the ones I'd heard of in folklore. These looked like they swam out of the depths of hell itself. Boneless pale tendrils reached for me and they were getting closer. The pale shapes reached my submarine as I rose higher. I kept praying to whatever god may be listening that the dropping pressure would force them off.
The air in a submarine is pressurized, so during normal operation, there should have been no danger of decompression sickness for me. Furthermore, normally I'd feel a little guilty about subjecting an undiscovered species of deep-sea mermaids to the horrors of the bends. But given my circumstances, I didn't have a lot of other options. They didn't let go, though. They should have. But they didn't. What were these things? I saw a splayed hand press against my viewport. Or it somewhat resembled a hand. It had suckers on it, like a tentacle, and the fingers curled open like tentacles. The creature crawled over my viewport, clinging to the tempora as it rose, and I could see the folds of its crab-like mouth opening and pressing against the glass. I could see some sort of bile rising up through its translucent throat, before it secreted it all over my viewport. Was it trying to digest me? Was that how these things fed? How strong were its stomach acids? Were they strong enough to? The window cracked. My heart skipped a beat. No. Grayson, what's wrong? They cracked the window, asked Sheila. Oh god, oh fuck, they did what? It has secreting some sort of enzyme, it has on the window, it has fuck, I am gonna die. You're not gonna die, baby.
Just keep ascending, okay? You react, feet just keep going. I nodded and kept on rising, although the question of whether or not the rest of the creatures were trying to digest the other parts of my submarine floated through my mind. How much damage could the tempura take before it imploded? How much longer did I have? The submarine still continued to rise, feet almost halfway home, almost. The creature outside of my viewport slithered along the glass, searching for a better area to try and digest. Past him, I noticed a few of his companions dropping off. Maybe the change in pressure finally was getting to them. From the corner of my eye, I suddenly noticed a flashing light. A warning. The hydraulics on one of the tempura's arms were shot. What else was damaged? I checked my oxygen levels. 32%. I should be had at least 14 hours of air. I'd only been down there for about 6 hours. I shouldn't have been this low. 31%. No, they de-damaged the air tanks. 30%. 29%. Feet. Sheila said. You still with me, baby? Why yeah, I said. I didn't mention my air situation. I didn't need to worry her further. The submarine continued its ascent. Feet. 24%. I was running out of time. The creatures still clung to the tempura. How had the pressure change not killed them yet? My oxygen was dropping faster than before. I was hemorrhaging air. Another crack formed across my viewport. I let out a little, involuntary gasp before trying to force myself to stop hyperventilating. Grayson, what was that? It is fine, I stammered, it is fine. Grayson, what the hell is going on down there? They re still on the submarine, they re still. I paused, looking at my oxygen levels. Percent of what? Grayson, what is going on? I paused. 18%. Air, I am losing air. That's fine, Yuri going to make it. She said, although I heard her voice cracking a little. Yuri gonna make it? I didn't answer. Feet. My oxygen level continued to drop. 15%. 14%. 12%. Feet. The creatures still clung to me as the submarine continued to rise. The one on my viewport was still there, slowly crawling along the glass again. I stared into its eyeless face and swore I was looking at the face of my killer. Feet. Oxygen had dropped to 9%. It dropped to 8% before I even got to feet. I was going to die here. The viewport cracked again and I squeezed my eyes shut. The submarine rocked. I was sure one of the thrusters had been damaged. My ascent slowed. Grayson, what is going on? I am sorry, Sheila. Another crack spread across my viewport. I am not making it back up. Yes, you are. I am sorry. The tears started to come as the reality of my death became clearer and clearer. This was it. Yuri coming back up, you hear me? God damn it, I'll bring you back up. I love you. That creature's face pressed against the glass. It vomited more of its stomach acid onto the cracked glass, and I wondered if this might finally be what broke it. Part of me hoped it would be. The one good thing about dying this deep was that at least I did die quickly. My suffering would be over. Then the creature suddenly pulled back, twisting and writhing violently. I saw other shapes moving past it in the water, other mermaids that had been clinging to the submarine. Something was agitating them. Something was scaring them off. Then I heard it over the radio, whale songs. What the hell? Grayson, are you still there? Are they finally breaking off? Sheila, what did you do? I am broadcasting some of the orca recordings we've been using. Are they still clinging to you? No. They backing off. Whatever you redoing, keep doing it. The submarine kept rising. Feet. 4% oxygen. I could still do this, right? The submarine continued to rise. 3%. Feet. 2%. Feet, so close, I was so close. I could almost see the surface through my viewport rushing up toward me. I tried not to breathe. Tried not to move. All I did was hope. 500 feet. I closed my eyes. Grayson, we have your signal, we're coming to pick you up. Sheila's voice sounded so far away as my submarine finally breached the surface of the water, and with the last of my strength, I pulled the emergency release on the hatch and threw it open, taking in lungful after lungful of fresh salty air. I didn't dare so much as touch the water beneath me, but I was topside again, and in the distance I could see the burger. "We see you," Sheila said. "We've got you, baby, we've got you." "I see you too," I said through the tears. Thank you, I didn't have any words left in me after that. As soon as I was back on the ship, I collapsed into Sheila's arms, breaking down into tears as I clung to her, terrified that at any moment, some sort of unspoken other shoe would drop and I'd lose her all over again. "That's alright, baby, I've got you, you resave. I felt her fingers running through my hair and I knew that what she said was true. I was home. I was safe. I left my colleagues to review the data that the Tempura gathered during its short expedition. As far as I know, they haven't published anything. I have a few ideas as to why, but I'll keep those to myself. Let us just say that some people would rather this information not become public. I have a feeling that the Tempura may not be diving again for some time, if ever. I will confess that I do consider that a bit of a shame. Despite everything, I would consider it a success. It endured far more stressful conditions than I had expected, and from what I heard, required fewer repairs than I thought it would. But, even if it was approved for another dive, it wouldn't be me piloting it. No. I will never be setting foot inside of that machine again, nor will I ever be returning to what my colleagues have been quietly referring to as the Jenner Trench. I can see. Every night, I wake up crying after dreaming of pale shapes outside of my cracked viewport, clinging to Sheila and sobbing. I can put myself in that situation again. I can Instead, I think I am going to spend the next few years on solid ground. There's a teaching position available at a local university. I think that might be the best place for me right now. Who knows, maybe I can help some other deadbeat discover a passion for marine biology. After everything, my love for the sea remains unchanged. I am just a little more wary of it these days. There's a death row inmate who we've executed over a dozen times. He won't stay dead. Self-harm. We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter, the way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all the black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. "Up and at 'em, Cowpoke," he called in that mocking tone. "Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a..." "Billy." Warden Taft silenced him with a word. "If you can act like a professional, you're going to have to sit this one out." Billy paused and licked his chapped lips. "Nah," he muttered. "This a show I can miss." Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked them to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done, or act scared of what is coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him, get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls, well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it struck a chord. We all watched him fry. The warden, his closest man. The thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections. The prison physician. The families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I'd noticed at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next morning, we came into work to see the whites of those beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. "Good morning, sirs," he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it. I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. "You're not why you're supposed to be." "I don't know what you mean, sir." He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. "You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir, but you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me?" Me and Taft looked at each other. We both had the exact same question on our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll into the morgue last night? Jesus Christ. Taft gagged when he pulled back the cadaver cover, stumbling away. It's Billy. I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll be forever haunted by the sight of my friend lying there on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling, open wide as if he'd spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was that poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taft were out on our ears and they would be prosecuted us too, but that would be required admitting it ever happened. But I just could never wrap my head around it. Of those dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed we were strapping a guard to the chair, not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it. At least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. I understand you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation. Oh. At 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time. There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, the professionalism had melted away, replaced with a baffled anxiety. And, well, it didn't work. I blinked. It didn't what? There came a long sigh. Perhaps it'd be best if you saw for yourself. And just like that, me and Taft had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18, 1999. Unofficially, they tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy to pretend to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the Olorado who flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath his skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickering, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. It was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now, from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak with anybody but the coas who once cared for him. Being walked into that interrogation room almost made me feel like I, myself, was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in, like he'd been sat there, motionless, waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers and psychos before and showed no hint of fear. But how could I not now, sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them? Glass. Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. I had thought you'd abandoned me. I winced. No, Glass, I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I am here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay. Glass, I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer. I didn't, he replied. It did. It? The thing standing behind you. I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. Glass, please, let us take this seriously, I replied. I've always treated you with respect, haven't ya? You've never had any problems with me. Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you. Oh. You here all believe that death is a punishment. There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. It's not. It's freedom, the only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners, while leaving me behind. With all of your machines and your science and your knowledge, surely you can find a way, if anyone. My throat felt suddenly dry. I had to take a sip of the water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. We're trying our best, Glass. But you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you. He moved for the first time. Leaning in, so slow as to be almost imperceptible. It won't let me die. And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear, my heart stopped beating and my blood froze in place in my veins, and it all felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once marked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I couldn't think. I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air and my vision blurred and my thoughts melded together. All I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine. Those infinite fathoms of darkness, that Stygian sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the blackness of his iris, and the eyes of things waiting a million leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then and come storming into the room. Later, they showed me the tapes from the security camera. There'd been nothing behind me. Nothing placing its thin hand upon my shoulder. Nothing at all. On May 7, 2001, Glass was set to be executed for the third time, viaduct hanging, or so I heard in some government black site somewhere, far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing glasses of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate. Really, because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez? I shook my head and he sighed. Back in, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up. Burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice one less hooker on the corner of 5th Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters. Even the ones we try and cast aside. Everybody has got people who love them, and childhood memories and all that. Everybody deserves justice. No matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force. Got the case reopened. Found the guy. And I watched him fry. And I like to imagine she was there watching too, as he burned. There was a tense moment. And then a chuckle. Course, after the bullet to the hip I couldn't walk the beat anymore. But I've been just as happy here. Watching justice be served, it makes me feel like there is some kind of karmic order to the world. Like there is some justice. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old, wrinkled, tired eyes, he said it. I've thought about it, and if Glass doesn't die tonight, I am finally going to retire, Mendez, he confessed. After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in a world where a monster like that is just beyond justice? I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? He'll die, sir, I promised. It'll work this time. It has to. But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward. His eyes. He stared at my expression as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things in his eyes. Haven't you seen them? And at that moment Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable, I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging, I realized. And with wide, horrified eyes, the same as Billy's had been, he silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized it was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief, but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue, and even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All the while I screamed myself hoarse. Help! Somebody, please! Jesus Christ, we need help in here! But nobody came. And all of a sudden, some unseen force seemed to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks, but I was so startled I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me, and his body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side at almost a 90-degree angle. Eyes wide, round and bloated, tongue hanging from dry lips. And then whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my co-workers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taft was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taft. I wanted out.
We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard.
But the agents in the sharp suits made one thing clear: if I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find a Joseph Glass that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black. Or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of outer darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass." No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. "I have some questions I am supposed to ask you. Is that okay?" Silence. I take a deep breath. "How old are you, Glass?" I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. "I am old, child." His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison and all were equally ancient. "Older than you could possibly know. Older than this nation, and older even than the empire that once bore it." I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. "Why did you do what you did to those girls?" "Just so I could feel something again," he whispered. "Anything? Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt? Remorse? You asked that of me? Me, who has watched empires rise and fall?" He almost sounded amused. "Does time feel remorse? For time has killed far more than I, but mankind is like the Hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by, essentially, identical stock and in greater numbers. And then they will die and be replaced. And so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I, myself, covet? Only the dead are given leave of the cycle. It is a blessing." And suddenly he stood from his chair, as if he'd never been restrained at all. "A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendes." I stared up at him in disbelief. "What, how did you?" But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling over the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotions I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt, betrayal. And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface. "You owe me a debt. Make good on your word. Pay your debt." I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust, but he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm my way out of his impossible grip. "I want tea. Get off of me, you sick bastard. Do it. Pay me what you owe." It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands around his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead, I could just feel the grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as my lungs burned for air. Yet I kept pressing harder and harder, as if hoping I might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And then those terrible hands grasped my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago, and every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood. And it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room and have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements. And then the both of us just sit there, staring at each other, without speaking, without moving, without blinking. For an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state, and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness had ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday as trash. Don't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I'd gotten lucky. That my nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public records and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been imprisoned if indeed he could ever be called a person at all. But they still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why. Maybe it is for research. I am sure the US military would love to find the secret to making its men as unkillable as glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass, and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred, his bloodstream polluted with pavalin and potassium chloride. It has been years since I've isolated myself from everyone I knew, hermiting away in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied utterly despite no signs of a struggle. God knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're retrying by now. He is not going to let me walk away from this. Not while I still owe him a debt. But I've been doing some research too. Research into those untold legions of things I witnessed staring up from the blackened sea in Glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know. Practiced rites, assembled tools, ingredients. And I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the second between every turn on our way to the black site, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every entry point. Maybe I am slipping into madness. Or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to the horror. To finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing: I have to pay what I owe. Even if it kills me. I drive trucks for a dairy farm in northern Alberta. Something strange is going on up here. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what a biogas plant is, how it works, or what they're actually used for, allow me to educate you. A biogas plant produces natural gas, or rather a substitute for natural gas, from fermented corn silage as well as other agricultural waste products. Farmers, such as myself, would bring in silage which we would unload into a large concrete bunker silo, basically just a big walled-in pit. The plant I delivered to used a modified snowcat to push the silage around and pack it down evenly in the pit. Once one pit filled up, they would tarp it and leave it to ferment and move on to the next pit. Once a pit was fully fermented, they would uncover it and use a large wheel loader to shovel the fermented silage into what's called an anaerobic digester. It's basically just a big tank with an agitator that you fill up with a bunch of organic matter and heat it up, which produces methane gas as the microorganisms inside begin to break everything down. This gas is then captured and can be used for basically everything natural gas is used for already, but it's supposed to be better for the environment or something. These plants are way more common in Europe, but they have started to pop up here in North America as well. And yes, before you ask, these places smell worse than you could possibly imagine. I always thought it was a little bit weird that they built one way up here in northern Alberta, but since the large dairy farm I worked at pretty much always had an excess of corn silage every year, we certainly welcomed another place to sell it to, especially since they're not picky. Trying to sell to another dairy farmer is always a hassle because they're always concerned with the quality, as they should be if they're feeding it to their cows, but the biogas plant basically just needs organic matter. It doesn't really matter what it is. If it can decompose, you can make gas out of it. Last fall we had an exceptionally good corn harvest, to the point where we still had 4 more fields still to harvest by the time we had enough to feed the cows for the next year. As I said, this isn't uncommon. When you're harvesting corn for silage, you use a totally different harvester. Rather than a combine that separates out the actual corn kernels from the rest of the plant, you use a forage harvester, which is essentially a giant wood chipper on wheels that takes in the whole crop and shreds it up. Since corn can easily grow 10 feet high and you spread that over a few thousand acres, you get a crazy high volume of silage coming in. Upon realizing how much excess we had, my boss did what he always did and called up the plant, who has always agreed to take in what we didn't need. The next morning, rather than trucking back to the farm, we were instructed to head straight over to the plant once our trailers had filled up. I arrived with my first load at the plant around 10 a.m. A man wearing a high-vista jacket directed me onto the large scale they used to weigh the trucks coming in and out. "Good harvest this year, Jim," the friendly old lady in the schoolhouse said as she took down the weight of my loaded truck. I felt bad, as I had been delivering to this plant on and off for the last 8 years I had worked on Mr. Baker's dairy farm, but I couldn't remember, or I just never learned her name. Oh well, I certainly wasn't going to out myself now. Well, if we're delivering here, you know it's a good one, I replied. And there's plenty more where this came from. Glad to hear it. She smiled back at me, handing me my paperwork. Now you just head right on down to the back there and the boys will show you where to dump. Thank you, I said, taking the papers from her and putting my truck back into gear.
I pulled off the scale and made my way to the back of the plant where the big concrete pits are.
Some more men in high vista gear directed me to back into a specific one. The giant pit was only about half full at this point, but the mountain of silage in my rear view mirrors still looked to be about 30 feet deep at its highest point. As usual, they had me back up until my trailer started to climb the pile a bit. This way there were no gaps in the pile and the snowcat wouldn't have to do as much pushing. As I watched the back wheels of my trailer roll onto the silage pile in my mirrors, I heard the unmistakable sound of a tire blowing out. A loud pop and then a slow hiss that quickly dissipated. Shit, I thought to myself as I hopped out to inspect the damage. One of the workers had also come to see what had happened. Must be one of your inside tires, he said to me as I approached. All the outside ones look fine. I bent down and looked under the truck. Sure enough, he was right. The inside tire on the right side of the rear axle was completely flat. Well, I suppose that's why semi-trucks have dual wheels, I said, trying to sound unfazed while simultaneously preparing myself for the ass chewing I was bound to receive for this later. I walked around to the back of the truck to inspect the damage further and saw what had punctured my tire. I stumbled back a bit as I realized it was what appeared to be a broken bone sticking out of the tire. What the? I said, mostly to myself, but the worker must have heard too, as it caused him to look down at it as well. When he did, his face went white for a second, then he composed himself. Well, I'll be damned, he said. I've been here since the plant opened and I ain't never seen that before. Some poor animal must have gone through the forage harvester, or some farmer's dog must have dug it up and dropped it in their silo. He seemed real chuffed as he said this and almost seemed like he was trying to convince himself of what he was saying, but I brushed it off as I figured he was probably just as jogged as I was. While I was still able to unload, I did have to leave the truck and trailer at the plant that night. A mobile tire repair service would be out in the morning to get it all fixed up. I got a ride back to the farm with our next truck to arrive at the plant and finished out the day pressure washing the manure spreaders. No doubt a reward for my efforts that day. I had to take a good long shower at the farm office before getting in my truck to head home for the night. As I started the engine, I went to pull my phone out of my pocket to plug it into the charger and realized that I didn't have it. I patted all my other pockets. Nope, definitely not there. I then realized that I had likely left it in the semi, which was now at the plant, probably locked behind a gate for the night. Logically, I could have just waited till morning to go and retrieve it. I was probably just going to go straight to bed when I got home anyway, so what did I need my phone for? But because humans now have separation anxiety from their phones burned into them at age 3, I found myself pulling out onto the road in the direction of the plant rather than home. I hoped there would be some friendly night security guard that would let me in to grab it and I'd be on my way in 5 minutes. I reached the plant just as it was getting dark, and indeed there was a security guard standing at the gate as I pulled up. A very heavily armed security guard. He had what looked like a military rifle slung over his back, and I wondered what on earth he needed that for. They were very illegal for civilians to own here in the Great Wide North, so they must have had a damn good reason to arm their security like this for the government to let them do it. He looked rather intimidating, but surprisingly was not at all antagonistic when I rolled down my window. "Are you lost, partner?" he said in a rather friendly tone. No, I work for one of the farms that delivers here," I said. "My truck blew a tire on the trailer earlier today and it's still sitting over by pit 3, and I think I left my phone in the cab. Do you mind if I go check?" He gave me a suspicious look, then he peered into the pickup bed and generally looked over me and my truck, then he gazed off down the road and looked at his watch. "Alright, you got 10 minutes, and try and stay out of the night shift's way," he said in a much less friendly tone. A loud click and then a buzzing sound came from the gate as it began to move, and I drove through it. By now it was almost completely dark, but the large spotlights of the plant made it easy to navigate. I came around the corner and saw my truck still sitting across from pit 3, and I pulled up in front of it. As I got out, I noticed that there was a large excavator up on top of the pile in pit 4. I knew it was digging into the silage, but I couldn't really see what it was doing properly because the concrete wall that separated pits 3 and 4 partially obscured it. I could also see the roof of the snowcat peeking up over the wall. It must have been parked a little ways away on top of the pile, and I figured it must have gotten stuck and they were using the excavator to try and get it out. I paid it little attention as I entered the cab of the semi-truck and quickly found my phone in the cup holder. I grabbed it, and just as I was climbing down, a voice called out to me. Hey, who the fuck are you? And what are you doing here? A disgruntled looking worker wearing the same high vista gear was running towards me. I just left my phone in this truck here, the security guard let me in to grab it, I stammered, backing up towards my pickup. Of course he fucking did, the man grumbled, and he snatched his radio out of his jacket pocket. Peter, what the hell did you let this dumbass in here for? You can't be doing that. He shouted into the radio. Relax, they're not even here yet, the guard's voice crackled through the radio. Actually I see headlights, if he's got his phone tell him to get out of there. The man looked back to me. You heard him, son, get lost and don't come back here after delivery hours again, you got it? I nodded and climbed back into my pickup truck and began to drive back towards the gate. As I exited, the guard waved to me from behind the big black GX Yukon that had pulled up to the gate. He appeared to be talking to the driver. There was a large U-Haul truck behind it, followed by another black Yukon. As I passed the last vehicle, I noticed in my rear view mirror the 3 trucks enter the plant and the guard shutting the gate behind them. That whole situation did not sit right with me. On the drive home, I contemplated everything that I had seen and heard from the guard and the other worker. They were up to something in the plant at night that maybe even the bosses didn't know about. My best guess was it was some kind of drug operation. If movies have taught me anything, drug kingpins always drive black SUVs. I know I should have left it alone, but life up here in northern Alberta was so boring, my curiosity ended up getting the better of me. I thought that I could help bring down some kind of criminal organization and be a local hero, and that worst case scenario nothing was happening and nothing would come of it. After harvest concluded, I had a couple of days off to rest as we'd been working pretty crazy hours lately. I however did not rest. I was trying to find out everything I could about the plant and the people who ran it. I really couldn't find anything about it, in fact it was as if the place didn't exist. You would think there would at least be a news story from when they built the place, what would it being the biggest boost to the local economy and job market our town had ever seen and all, but there was nothing. Finally I decided the only thing to do was to see if I could observe what those black SUVs and the U-Haul truck were doing in the plant at night. Maybe get some photos of the exchange and hand them off to the police. I did some poking around on Google Maps and found an old logging road that ran across the ridge behind the plant. There was a little dirt area where people often parked to unload their HC to go riding in the woods up there that was maybe only a kilometer or so from the north side of the plant. I drove up there just before dark and hiked down through the woods all the way to the north fence of the plant. It was just a chain link fence like you'd see around a schoolyard, not a barbed wire prison fence or anything, so I made quick work of climbing over it. Luckily for me, there was a lot of equipment and old dumpsters and shipping containers in this part of the plant for me to hide behind as I made my way towards where the main gate was. I crouched down behind one of their company trucks parked near the gate and waited about 20 minutes before I saw the black SUVs pull up. This time though they didn't have a U-Haul, they had a much larger yellow Penske box truck. They must be hauling some serious product to be renting that thing. I watched as the trucks rolled through the gate, and much like they had done with me a few days prior, the plant workers in high vista gear directed them back towards the pits. I began to sneak my way over there, being careful to stay out of sight. I realized very quickly that I wouldn't be able to get very close while still remaining hidden. The area around the pits was largely wide open to allow to turn around and back in, so there was nothing to conceal me as I approached. I noticed the office nearby and had an idea. I snuck over to it and tried the door. It was open, but the lights were off inside. Luckily no alarms went off and I found what I came for quickly. A high vista uniform and a white hard hat laying on the break room table. I also grabbed some safety glasses and a dust mask, as it wasn't uncommon for the workers to wear them. There was a lot of dust around the pits and I figured it would help conceal my identity. After putting on the uniform and sneaking back outside, I observed the workers for a few minutes to see what they were doing and how best to blend in. Most of them appeared to either be standing around watching the trucks pull up or walking somewhere, so I figured just walking like I was on a mission was good enough. Turns out I didn't need to fake it for long. As I neared the yellow Penske truck, I saw some men getting out of the black SUVs. They were dressed in what looked like church robes, but definitely not Catholic since they didn't have the collar. One of them turned to me and I froze. "Hey buddy, we got a pretty big load tonight, mind giving us a hand?" Realizing my cover was working, I decided to play along and just leave the part about me helping the drug lords out of my statement to the police. I nodded and walked over with the other workers and awaited instructions. I heard the sound of a diesel engine coming closer and looked over to see the excavator I had seen coming around the corner and begin to climb the silage pile in pit 4 again. The snowcat was behind it, but instead of following the excavator up the pile, it came towards us. It had some kind of large metal box attached to the blade that was about the size of a small car. The operator set the box down next to the Penske truck and hopped out. The same disgruntled man I had encountered the other night got out of the cab. "Jesus man, that's a big truck you got there, probably gonna take a couple trips to unload this thing," he said to the men in robes. One of them opened up the back of the box truck, and where I expected to see a giant pile of cocaine bricks or something, there was something I never expected. Bodies, and lots of them, just thrown haphazardly into the back of this truck. I had to fight the urge to fill my dust mask with vomit as I saw them. The workers began loading them into the box on the blade of the snowcat, just tossing them on with little regard for how they landed. No one seemed to notice me just standing there, so I slowly backed up into the shadows and made my way over to pit 3. It was almost full by now, so I climbed up the pile to a spot where I could look over the concrete wall into pit 4, where the excavator was, without being spotted. Once up there, I saw the snowcat climbing up the pile towards a large hole the excavator had dug in it. There were some more workers up there who began throwing the bodies off into the hole as one of the men in robes climbed out of the passenger seat in the snowcat. He just stood on the track watching as the bodies were piled into this impromptu Massachusetts grave they had constructed. He stayed up on the pile while the snowcat went down for the second load. This was all starting to make sense now. This was the perfect cover for disposing of bodies. They would get broken down in the pile same as everything else, and because they were constantly being emptied into the digester, the evidence would only be around for a few months, and the horrific smell of the plant would conceal any foul odors produced by the dead bodies. But there was one question left. Where were they coming from? This was way too many bodies for this to be the mafia or something killing off problematic individuals. By the time the truck was totally unloaded, there must have been 100 dead people in that hole. No, this had to be some cult activities of some sort, and the robes the men from the Black Subs were wearing backed up that theory. Maybe these were just what was left over from some sort of ritual sacrifice or something. Whoever these people are, they must have some kind of deal with the plant's owners, because I could tell the workers had done this before. From the time the truck had arrived to the time the excavator started burying the corpses in rotting corn silage, it had only taken about half an hour. I didn't even bother ditching the uniform. I got out of that plant as fast as I could. I sprinted up through those woods back towards my truck with my heart beating so fast I thought it would explode. As soon as I was in the truck, I locked all the doors and dialed 911 on speaker as I peeled out of the forest. I told the operator everything that had happened over the last couple of days and what I had seen that night. I practically begged them to send someone there right away, which the niece lady on the other end of the line promised they would. She asked for my name and contact information so they could get a hold of me for a statement, which I gladly gave them. She assured me they would investigate the matter, and I thanked her and hung up the phone. I then pulled over and got out of the truck and proceeded to finally let out all the vomit I had been holding in for the last hour or so. I ditched the plant uniform on the side of that old forest road and made my way for home. As I was approaching my house, I saw a car up ahead. As I drew closer, I could make out the distinctive reflective tape they put across the back of police cars. I slowed down as I had come upon him pretty fast, and I didn't want to get a speeding ticket after all I'd been through that night. I followed the cop a few more kilometers towards town. My house was on this road coming up shortly. As we approached my driveway, the cop put his signal on to turn in. I breathed as I really did, and someone out to get on me, and I was about to put my signal on as well when I noticed the black XU parked in my driveway and the man in robes standing next to it with a gun. The cop turned in and parked next to him. Given that the cop had basically zero reaction to the man standing there with a weapon, my heart sank as I realized whatever this is runs much deeper than I thought, and revealing who I was to that 911 dispatcher had just dumped me. I kept on driving, praying that neither of them recognized me, and thanking the Alberta government for not requiring front license plates that the cop would have totally seen on the drive over otherwise. I just kept on driving, expecting at any minute to see police lights behind me or a big black SUV blocking the road ahead of me and men in dark robes coming out of the darkness to get me, but nothing happened. I don't even know how long I drove, for I just drove until I had to pee so badly I was forced to stop at a truck stop and realized I was somewhere in Saskatchewan. I've been on the run, so to speak, now for about 6 months. I don't know if anyone's even following me, but I have to be sure. I'm writing this all out to get it off my chest, and out there as a warning before I ditch this phone and start my life over in another province as far away from there as I can get. I don't know what's going on up there, but there is something very dark happening in northern Alberta, and I've probably only scratched the surface of it. Either way, I want no part of any of it. In the caverns under Frost Hollow, I found the madness of the ancient gods. I sit alone in my room on the 7th floor, writing what will surely be my last will and testament. The heroin which allowed me to forget and to sleep for the last couple of years has lost its power to keep the screaming terrors away. The drug destroyed my body and mind, gradually eating away at them like a corrosive acid. Now I have become a slave to it. And yet without it, I do not sleep for weeks, but instead continuously see the scenes from the terrible night running through my head on repeat as worsening waves of madness crash on the shores of my consciousness. In the caverns under the town of Frost Hollow, I found the meaning of true madness. Ever since I escaped the den of horrors, it is difficult to tell what is real and what is only the feverish delirium of an unhinged mind. Even now, they wait behind the door to this cheap, bare-rented room. They drag their claws over the wood. I hear them hissing in that strange, ancient tongue, the one I first heard in the tombs of rock that had been undisturbed for countless millennia. I had first heard rumors of an unexplored cavern from my friend, an experienced caver named Sonia who had explored caverns all over the world. I had been looking for some excitement in my life, some break from the constant monotony and boredom of simply working and sleeping. I had gone caving quite a few times over the year leading up to the trip, but I was not nearly as experienced and had never explored a supposedly virgin passageway of cavern before. "How do you know no one has gone down there?" I asked, curious. We sat across from each other at a local diner, getting some early breakfast before our planned descent. The sunrise was still another half hour away, the sky flat and dark. We would be joined by Sonia's husband, Phil, who would meet us there shortly after sunrise. I repressed an urge to yawn, chugging half of the steaming hot coffee in one long swallow. Sonia leaned close to me, her nearly colorless blue eyes reminding me of chunks of ice floating down a muddy stream. "Phil's friend just found it randomly," she whispered before glancing around conspiratorially, as if she feared someone would care enough to eavesdrop on a conversation about a cave. "Well, it is in the middle of a farm, and Phil's friend, Jack Graysoul, owns the entire property and surrounding woods. Jack says he noticed the cows kept going over to a certain spot in the field when it got really hot during the summertime. They would all gather around this little indentation in the grass. After seeing it a few times, Jack got curious and went to investigate what the cows were doing. He found a small hole in the ground, almost entirely covered by weeds and grass. He said he felt a cool breeze constantly blowing out of the hole, a breeze that smelled like burning matches and charred metal. After bringing out some shovels and digging down a couple feet, Jack realized that the hole wasn't a hole at all, but the beginning of a steep passageway leading deep into the bowels of the earth. The owner of the land decided to unofficially call the newly discovered cavern Graysoul Caverns. Out of respect for him, this is also the name we all used. This is the story of how I found myself in the bowels of a strange subterranean tunnel, a tunnel where creatures beyond my comprehension slunk and hunted, skittering monstrosities who would be more at home in a nightmare. After grabbing a couple coffees to take with us, Sonia drove over to Graysoul Farms. Cows stood out in the grassy fields, huddled in tight circles as they repetitively chewed. The thin silhouette of Jack Graysoul waited for us next to the herd. He had a face like a raisin, I thought to myself. I watched his thin, shaking body standing in the middle of an overgrown grassy field. Jack stared down blankly at something only he could see. Sonia and I started unloading some equipment from the car while we waited for Phil. Once we had the backpacks loaded with some simple supplies, such as water, food, headlamps, rope, a couple extra batteries, some buck knives and radios, we headed over to accompany Jack. We weren't taking much, as we didn't really expect to be down there for more than 6 or 7 hours at the most. Jack Graysoul's withered old face was as slack and expressionless as that of a corpse. He stared down at the ground as if he were in a trance, waving back and forth slowly on his feet like a plant in a light breeze. "Jack!" Sonia called out as we approached. I could hear the man's teeth chattering as we got nearer. "Hey, what are you doing over here this early? You interested in accompanying us down there?" Sonia joked. But Jack might as well have been totally deaf for all the reaction he gave. Sonia glanced over at me with an anxious expression. I wondered if the old man was having a stroke. I quickly walked over to where he stood, staring down at a black circular hole about 3 feet across directly in front of his feet. The entrance to Graysoul Caverns stared up at us like a sightless pupil. As I drew within a few feet of Jack and looked straight into his blank eyes, I noticed something alarming. His pupils were quickly dilating and constricting before my eyes. They would shrink to tiny pinpoints, then, a couple seconds later, rapidly expand until they became dark and serious. I could see his thready, rapid heartbeat pulsating in a vein on the side of his temple. Alarmed, I reached forward and put my hand on his shoulder. Instantly, he came to life, like a man waking up from a nightmare. Shrieking, he looked at me with fully dilated pupils, reminding me of a panicked deer surrounded by wolves. His quavering old man's voice shook with ineffable existential horror and mortal fear. He took a step back away from us, seeming to realize where he was and what he was doing. He looked around, confused, then straight at me and Sonia. His eyes focused with anger and fear, as if we were demons here to drag him down to hell. His eyes flicked back and forth between us constantly. Jack raised a trembling hand and pointed it straight at my heart. "It's you," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. His teeth chattered despite the warm spring air. His skin looked deathly pale. "You really one who will bring an end to humanity, who will release the ruler of nightmares upon us." He continued to point accusingly for a long moment at me, his face turning chalk white. Then his eyes rolled up in his head. Slowly he stumbled and fell backwards onto the soft grass of the field. "Jack!" Sonia cried, running over to the old man. Jack's breaths had started to come in slow, drawn-out gurgles, like a man with a slit throat trying to breathe. Frothy blood bubbled from his lips as they turned blue. Staring up at the endless expanse of cloudless sky, he exhaled one last shuddering breath and died. Phil showed up only a couple minutes later. He found me and Sonia in a state of utter panic, both of us bent double over the still body of Jack. Sonia was on the phone with 911 and I was trying to give Jack chest compressions. The way his fingernails and lips shone with that cyanotic blue cast made me feel sick and weak. I knew it was futile, that I was simply playing with a corpse at this point, but I didn't know what else to do. I felt if I didn't do something, I might explode. I heard the faint wailing of sirens approaching as Sonia's panicked voice continued babbling to the 911 operator. Phil stood by her side, his tall, dark features searching and lost. "Oh God, I think he is dead." Sonia cried over and over to the operator, as if she thought the operator could do anything about it. I didn't hear what the operator said in response. As the ambulance pulled in, I gave up on chest compressions. I stood up and took a step back, looking sadly down on the kindly old man's dead body. The paramedics ran over. Phil, Sonia and I stood back while they worked on the corpse, trying to shock the heart back into life. But Jack's open eyes stayed glazed as they stared sightlessly up into eternity. The paramedics left. A couple police officers stayed behind to ask us a few routine questions. Eventually, after an hour or so, they left too. "What a fucked up day," Phil said, shaking his head grimly. "Do you guys still want to do this? Maybe it is an omen from God telling us to go home." Sonia and I exchanged a glance, then we both nodded at the same time. "Definitely," she said. "It is sad what happened to Jack, but realistically, we don't know what is going to happen to this property now that he has passed away. It might get sold or taken by the bank for all we know. This could be our one and only chance to explore this cave." "I don't believe in omens. I am still down," I said, feeling slightly sick from the experience. I still remembered how Jack's body had cracked under the weight of my chest compressions, how his ribs had snapped like bones shattering in greedy hands. "We'll do it in memory of Jack. I plan to put this up on YouTube." I pulled my GoPro out of my bag, turning it on. Phil groaned at that. "Do we have any idea how far down this cave goes?" Phil asked. I felt a sense of relief now that the topic had changed from the death of the old man. "I sent a little camera down on a rope, but it only went about 100 feet, Sonia responded. "It is pretty steep at first, then it levels out. I can't really see much after it leveled out, but it looks like it should be easy to climb down. There is plenty of handholds, lots of jutting rocks." Phil put on his headlamp and small pack. As he crawled down into the hole, his tanned face looked up at us and gave us one last devilish grin. Once he had gone down a few dozen feet, Sonia started descending. She looked excited and happy. I noticed how she couldn't stop smiling as she disappeared from view. I watched their lights grow smaller and dimmer in the circular tunnel. I marveled at how perfectly circular the entrance was. It almost didn't even look natural. Taking a deep breath in, I followed my friends down into the dark. "This isn't too bad," I said as I climbed down. The jutting rocks gave plenty of handholds and footholds for us. It wasn't so tight that it felt like a coffin either. "It only gets easier from here," Sonia called up. "How do you know?" I asked. "You said you've never been here before." She laughed. "I know. Probably just wishful thinking," she said. Far below us, Jack's voice drifted up, faint and weak. He had already reached the bottom. "The tunnel really opens up down here, guys," he called. "It is somewhat bizarre though." "What do you mean by that?" Sonia asked. I looked down, seeing Sonia and I would reach the bottom in seconds. Forget it, I'll let it be a surprise. I heard her drop down. Slowly and carefully, I lowered myself down the last few feet. There was a short fall onto a smooth granite floor. I looked up, seeing what Phil and Sonia were so mesmerized by. Oh wow, I said, speechless. I blinked rapidly, wondering if the image would clear like a mirage. The tunnel was cut into a perfectly triangular shape, each side about 7 feet long. The ceiling met in a point above our heads. All along the smooth walls of gray rock, I saw thousands of black orbs peeking out. They looked similar to obsidian, but they were perfectly smooth and circular, each about the size of an orange. They were formed into interlocking diagonal patterns and followed the tunnel straight down as far as the eye could see. What is this place? Sonia asked, taking a tentative step forward. I looked up, seeing the distant pinpoint of sunlight far above our heads. Our voices continued to echo off down the massive tunnels, disappearing in eerie waves into the thick curtain of shadows. Are you recording all this? Phil asked me. I laughed, giddy. Of course. This is internet gold right here, I said. No one is going to believe that this isn't man-made, however. I can't even believe it. Do you think Jack was playing a joke on us or something? Jack had the sense of humor of a wet paper towel, Phil whispered, shaking his head. No, he wouldn't do something like this. Well, let us go check it out, Sonia said, taking a step forward. Her headlamp bobbed up and down rapidly, throwing dancing shadows through the triangular tunnel. It continued straight ahead, without the slightest deviation or curve, disappearing off into a dark point in the distance. We walked as fast as we could, excited to see where, if anywhere, the strange tunnel led. Phil, always the conspiracy theorist, babbled excitedly. This has to be aliens, man, he said, running his fingers through his dark hair. I bet that scientists will find out this shit is millions of years old when we get back up and tell everyone. Maybe aliens came to Earth in ancient times and made a bunch of stuff underground. Gradually, as we walked, I noticed the tunnel opening up. The pointed triangular ceiling rose up higher above our heads and the walls moved outwards, as we were walking up a triangular funnel. At first it was so subtle that I didn't believe it when Sonia pointed it out. No, look, she said, raising her hand above her head. When we first started down this weird tunnel, my fingers were only maybe a foot away from the top. Now it is a couple feet. I was about to respond when our headlamps illuminated something standing in the middle of the tunnel. What the fuck is that? I whispered, stopping cold in my tracks. Phil and Sonia looked up at the abomination at the same time. Its back was to us. It stood nearly as tall as the tunnel, which was now about 20 feet high. The bottom half looked black and spidery with dozens of long, jointed legs. A bloody, white spine rose out of the Massachusetts of legs. Inhumanly long, skeletal arms stretched out in front of it. Its face was pointed away from us, but the back of its head resembled an enormous pointed skull with deep fissures like the cracks of an earthquake running through the bone. The abomination stayed as still as a statue, and for a long moment, I wondered if we were looking at some macabre work of art. Then, suddenly, one of its insectile legs twitched. A moment later, the other legs started jerking and twisting. There was a sound like bones shattering as it rose up to its full height, turning around to face us. Its face was like something from a nightmare, melting and reforming constantly like dripping candle wax. I would see a black eye appear on its forehead, then a grinning mouth on its chin, then the features would get sucked back into the folds of melting flesh. After a few moments, two enormous eyes appeared on its face, dark and cold like craters on the surface of the moon. The mouths and noses disappeared back into the dripping skin, and only the two lidless eyes remained, emanating a cold, reptilian consciousness beyond the ability of my mind to comprehend. I felt terror radiating from its body like freezing waves. Free me, it cried in a gurgling voice that seethed with insanity. It had a shrieking, metallic ringing behind every word that gave it an alien quality. Free me and I will give you the waters of eternal life. Within me I contain the seeds of immortality. Within the nightmares we live forever, always together, never alone. Who are you? I asked, terrified. The black reptilian skin of the enormous beast glistened as it knelt down, its massive face drawing near to mine. A sideways mouth burst out of the liquefied flesh, showing hundreds of fangs growing like tumors from its white, bloodless gums. The fangs varied in size from only a couple inches to long, sword-like projections that stabbed into the creature's flesh, causing white blood glittering with rainbows to fall like raindrops all around me. I have many names, it hissed, its 1,000 voices rising and falling in crashing waves of sound. I was present at the beginning, when this planet was no more than dead cliffs and endless freezing oceans. Those holy ones who search for us, the ancient ones, call me Nyarlathotep. How do we free you? Phil asked, looking terrified. He held Sonia's hand tightly. By letting me into your mind and body, Nyarlathotep cried, shaking the cavern. I was thrown down here, cursed and forgotten. I cannot leave this place of shadows within this body. But in the body of another, my consciousness can be free and the seeds of new life can spread beyond this prison. There is no way anyone is going to do that, I said, my eyes widening as Nyarlathotep's reptilian skull turned towards me in fury. I mean, you're asking one of us to give up our individuality, our lives, right? I am asking you to become one with me and gain power undreamed of by mortals, it cried. I have within me the fountain of life, the waters that send death away screaming. I glanced anxiously at Phil and Sonia, wondering if we would have to run. The answer is no, I said. I am sorry. Yeah, we can do that, Phil said, backing me up. But anyways, I think our trip has ended. It is time to turn around. You will never return, Nyarlathotep cried, skittering away from us. If you will not accept salvation, then you must accept death. Within seconds it slunk away from us, backpedaling on its many skittering legs into the shadows. All around us, a rumbling started. There was a pounding that crashed through the rock tunnel, as if an insane blacksmith were hammering on a massive anvil. The ringing of crashing rock started off slowly, with a few stones smashing down around us with heavy blasts of sound. Within seconds the cacophony sped up, rising into a constant stream of destruction. The black orbs were spinning in place all up and down the tunnel, their glossy obsidian surfaces flashing with sparks of blue light. It is collapsing. Phil cried, running back in the direction we came, holding Sonia's hand as she tried to keep up with him. I could only stare for a long moment, not sure what to do. It seemed that the direction Phil was heading stood closer to total collapse. Wait! I cried, but my voice was drowned out in the destruction all around us. I felt a rock smash into my shoulder, sending me down to my feet. I heard Phil give a scream of pain, then another stone came down and smashed into my forehead. I remember seeing everything spinning around me as the world went black. I awoke to find my headlamp still shining straight up in the dusty tunnel. Large chunks of the tunnel had slid out of place and crashed to the stone floor. The granite chunks that had fallen looked unnaturally smooth, most of them in the shapes of cylinders or cubes and varying in size from that of an egg to that of a small car. My head throbbed. It felt as if a tight belt of fire were wrapped around my temples. Groaning, I put my fingers up to my forehead. They came away slick with blood. Slowly, I started pushing myself up on my feet. I was relieved that nothing seemed broken. I had a deep gash running from the center of my scalp down to my left temple and some shallower cuts on my shoulders and back, but I knew none of that was life-threatening. Sonia? I whispered, my voice coming out weak and strained. I reached into my pack and found a bottle of water. I chugged it quickly in one long swallow. Phil? I cried again, this time stronger. I heard a soft weeping nearby. Staggering, I followed the sound. Sonia was bloody and covered in cuts and scrapes, sitting next to Phil's prone form. I saw Phil's right arm pinned under a massive slab of granite. His arm disappeared from the elbow down in a spreading puddle of thick, dark blood. Oh God, Max, I think he has hurt really bad, she wept. Phil's eyes rolled wildly in his head, his face pale and bloodless. I looked down the way we had come, seeing the entire tunnel blocked by large slabs of stone, many with strange, black orbs peeking out like the lenses of cameras. I don't know how much time passed. My phone died after a day, and then we were counting the endless darkness in breaths and tears. Phil swam in and out of consciousness as his arm putrefied and blackened around the crush site. After a couple days, Sonia and I agreed that something had to be done. We told Phil we would need to amputate his arm. He was half delirious, but he came back long enough to understand us and not weakly. We made a fire with Phil's pack, trying to find fuel to throw in it to get it roaring. As it grew, I saw one of the black orbs near the flames abruptly ignite, as if it had been covered in gasoline. Blue, almost colorless flames rose from its surface. We started throwing the small black orbs on the fire until it rose high in the air. I sanitized the buck knife with the flames and pulled a rope tourniquet tight around Phil's arm. He was conscious but seemingly insane, talking to himself more than anyone else. How are we going to get the car started without a key? He gurgled to someone only he could see. We need to look around. It has to be here somewhere. Phil, can you hear me, bud? We need to fix your arm. We need to get you out of this mess. Okay. I said as comfortingly as I could. Phil's eyes rolled wildly, but they didn't meet my own. I sighed and looked over at Sonia. Let us do it, I said, giving a grim nod. I pulled the buck knife out, slicing quickly down through the flesh next to the tourniquet. His veins throbbed like fat worms as the blackened, necrotic skin split easily under the blade, releasing a rancid-smelling gas that hissed out of the wound. I couldn't believe how hard it was to slice all the way through the arm. It felt like I was stuck in that hellish task forever. Phil's eyes rolled in his head as his skin turned the color of clotted milk. God, Jesus, make it stop, Phil whispered over and over, exhaling ragged, pain-filled breaths. The blood spurted from the blackened, dying tissue all over the dust-covered cavern floor, covering my hands in its warm, slick embrace. After what was probably only 3 or 4 minutes but felt like hours, I had sliced all the way down to the bone. The infected tissue of his arm spurted great gouts of orange pus mixed with rivulets of blood. The hard part was over. Standing up, I took my steel-toe sneaker and stomped down on his arm as hard as I could. Phil cried out in a powerful voice, as if all the agony and suffering in the world was contained in that one shriek. The bone snapped under my weight with a sound like a tree branch cracking. A moment later, Phil rolled away from the rock that had pinned me in place for so long. Something alien and spongy was shoved into my face, a Massachusetts of destroyed red tissue pulsating in time with a runaway heartbeat. At first shell-shocked and revolted, my mind couldn't comprehend that I was looking at the stump of Phil's mutilated arm. I hardened my heart and forced the giddiness and madness to the back of my mind. The time had come to cauterize the wound. "Sonia, give it to me," I said with a tremor in my voice. I reached out a hand towards her, a hand stained with Phil's blood. It looked as if I were wearing a wet, crimson glove. Sonia only stared blankly at me for a long moment, however. A surge of anger ran up my chest. "Sonia, toughen the fuck up. He's going to die if you just sit there." I swore at her, hearing my deep, angry voice bounce around the caverns. Sonia pulled back as if she were struck. Inwardly, I cursed having a woman as my only able-bodied companion in this situation. She was a competent enough caver, but what would happen if violence and blood came over us? What would happen if, or more realistically when, we needed to fight? Grimly, Sonia leaned forward and yanked the burning black orb out of the roaring fire, handing it to me on the end of a buck knife that had just barely pierced its hard, strange exterior. The handle of the knife felt coarse and splintery under my filthy skin. I put it to the spongy stump of Phil's arm. The stump twitched violently. Phil tried to pull away as black smoke rose from the burning flesh. There was a smell like bacon sizzling. The searing meat of Phil's arm blackened and crisped under the heat of the orb, which had become no more than a cylinder of glowing blue embers by this point. I felt simultaneously sick and giddy. I didn't know if I wanted to laugh or vomit. I felt like I was on the verge of some kind of madness, that the stress and insanity of the experience had started to shatter my mind. His eyes rolled back in his head and he appeared to go into a seizure for a few seconds. With a long exhalation of breath, he finally, mercifully, lost consciousness. It is hard to admit it, even this close to the end, but a small, sick piece of me was jealous of Phil. Most likely, he would be dead soon, maybe within hours, while Sonia and I would slowly starve and dehydrate like animals over a period of weeks. I looked at her light body and soft skin, seeing the feminine curves of her hips and chest. She was a beautiful woman. I knew Phil to be a lucky man. At least before this trip he was. I watched her body, wondering if I had what it took to eat her or Phil if I had to. Did I have an iron heart that would allow me to slice into my friends and consume their raw, cold flesh? Perhaps by that point it would be hunger and madness driving me forward and I wouldn't even hesitate. I shuddered at the very thought. I fell asleep that night having strange dreams of massive gods with melting faces sitting in judgment in a circle around me. We had very little food or water left. No one knew we were down here. Rescue was not coming. When I awoke, I found myself alone. Phil had died from his injuries while I slept, the black streaks of septic shock spreading up his arm towards his heart. His eyes stared sightlessly up at the rock ceiling. "Sonia?" I called out, my heart racing as I sat up. "Where are you?" My headlamp was growing dim. I looked in my pack, realizing I was on the last of my batteries. I saw a silhouette walking out of the darkness, the thin, pale form of Sonia. She was trembling badly. "I saw them," she said. "Nyarlathotep and its priests. The priests aren't human. They look reptilian with sideways mouths and too many eyes." She shuddered. "Why would you do that?" I asked. Her eyes grew distant. "You know we're not getting out of here alive," she said. "Not on our own. I wanted to see what it offered. It says that if we take a piece of its nightmare into us, we will gain the power to leave this place, that it simply wants to see the surface and spread its nightmares there." I shook my head. "Insanity," I muttered. We'd be better off dead. Sonia nodded. My thoughts exactly, she responded grimly. I didn't realize what she meant until the next day, when I woke up and found her hanging next to Phyllis' body, her tongue swollen and blue as it poked out of her cyanotic lips. And then I was truly alone. Soon after Sonia committed suicide, the last of the batteries for the headlamp died. I had run out of food and had only a small sip of water left. I don't know how much time passed in the darkness, starving and raving, following the tunnel by running my hands over the walls. I heard many things skittering in the darkness, and a few times, I heard the demonic voice of Nyarlathotep as it split and distorted. You are on death's door, it hissed. Will you not drink from the fountain of life? I couldn't tell where the voice came from in the maddening blackness. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I had lost nearly all of my sanity in the pit of shadows by this point. I tried laughing constantly to keep my spirits up, and when that failed, I simply cried. I'll do it, I wailed. I'll do it. Just let me see the sky again. Get me out of here, Nyarlathotep. Everything went deathly silent all around me, then a laugh rang out like the grinding of glass. In front of me, I saw a tornado of fire descending from the ceiling, surrounding the massive, spidery form of Nyarlathotep. It rose its skeletal arms upwards, as if it were Zeus calling down lightning. In the sudden brightness, I saw the fiery form of snakes slithering and centipedes skittering forwards in the tornado, each massive creature sculpted from flames in the spinning cyclone of energy. Nyarlathotep reached into the tornado of fire with its sharp points of fingers and plucked something small from it. The fire instantly dissipated. In its hand I saw a tiny, swirling orb that looked like it contained a firestorm within it. The nightmare seed, Nyarlathotep gurgled as it skittered forward towards me. I could only stare, open-mouthed and starving. I hadn't slept for days, it felt like, and everything seemed slow and unreal. In a blur, its skeletal arm shot out and forced the orb into my mouth. Despite the fire raging within it, it felt freezing cold. As it touched my tongue, it gave off a sensation like frostbite all throughout my mouth. I screamed and tried spitting it out, but it seemed to have a mind of its own. It started liquefying, dripping down my throat. I felt something cancerous and sick spreading throughout my body, radiating out from my heart and stomach to every inch of it. I tried to scream, but it caught behind my teeth. I fell to my knees, clawing at my face as that insane, alien laugh continued resounding all down the tunnel. I fell unconscious and woke up under a beautiful sky in the fields of Grey Soul Farms. Soon after, I realized that my life would never be the same. Everywhere I went, I could hear the wailing voice of Nyarlathotep. Behind the trees, I always saw skittering shadows, creatures with long, spidery legs that stalked me every day and night. I slept with every light in the house turned on, yet when I woke up, they would all be shut off, and I would find myself in darkness, next to something in the bed with far too many legs and a face that dripped like burning wax. I sold everything I owned and tried to move far away, to give as much distance between myself and those cursed caverns as I could, but the nightmares followed me like a shadow. I realized what a fool I was in those ephemeral moments of madness. Sonia was much wiser than myself. I should have killed myself or died rather than allowing that thing inside of me. Even now, I can feel it creeping through my heart, spreading through my blood. I feel it trying to crawl its way out of my throat, the thin, black legs peeking out at the back of my esophagus. I only hope that, when I finally jump and feel my bones shatter against the concrete far below, I will kill whatever is inside of me. For I fear the consequences for the world if it were to escape. My neighbor's basement hides a terrible secret. I naturally fell into babysitting around the age of 14. Through friends and family, I got leads for babysitting to score some cash, which definitely beat having to work at a restaurant. The job had its ups and downs, but overall it wasn't a bad gig at all. Yet, as many good experiences as I had, they were all eclipsed by one night. A new family in town talked to my dad at work, and it turned out that they needed a babysitter. I happily took the job and found myself watching their 10-year-old boy a couple of weeks later. There was nothing out of the ordinary about the family themselves. They were the model citizens of suburban America, complete with the white picket fence and blue shutters. Nothing about their house was strange or even unique. Their son Avery was very mild-mannered and polite. Even their car was basic. Not that these were bad things, but I expected it to be a very boring night. What I did not expect was the uncomfortable, inexplicable feeling that I got when I set foot in the house. A chill ran through me, but there was no draft. I rubbed my arms as I gazed at their staircase as we passed. They gave me a brief tour of the house before they left a note of instructions and all the usual information I expected from a job. While trying to figure out what was making me so uneasy about the place, I noticed something about their basement door when I passed it. A padlock was placed on the door along with a deadbolt in place. Any questions? The father asked as my mind was pulled out of my curiosity. No, sir. Everything looks great. So they left and Avery and I played some games before I made dinner. A couple of times I thought I heard Avery call me into the den. Both times I found him sitting on the couch in what most recognize as the TV zombie state. He denied having called me and I went back to making dinner. After the third time, I told Avery it wasn't funny and that he should stop. I am not doing anything, I am just watching TV. His voice went to that higher tone of pleading, sounding desperate for me to believe him. Avery, I know it is my first time and sometimes you wanna test things out, but I am trying to get dinner ready, so if you call me again, I am not checking on you, okay? I didn't say anything. The child glared at the TV with a pouting face and I began to feel bad. As many times as I've heard lies, I was starting to sense that he was telling the truth. So what was I hearing? Hey, it is fine. I am not mad. Promise. Avery turned his head back towards me, seeming to test if I was the one fibbing now. How about I let you stay up a little later if we forget about it? Do you really promise? Pinky promise. With our contractual pinkies interlocked, spirits were raised again and I was able to finish dinner. Although I didn't finish without hearing Avery's voice calling me once more. I ignored it, and when Avery didn't mention it at dinner I figured it was him fooling around again. The whole time we chatted as we ate, I couldn't help but feel that something was not right about this house. As hard as I tried to not look, my eyes kept diverting to the heavy padlock and chain on the basement door. Curiosity got the best of me and as we were cleaning up, I couldn't help but ask. So Avery, what is the deal with the basement door? What do you mean? His words did not match his demeanor. It was obvious he didn't make eye contact as he forced his sentence out. Simone, you know what I mean. The padlock, chain and deadbolt. Why all have dangerous chemicals down there? Avery's face grew paler and he stared at the wall for a moment. Hey, it is okay. You don't have to tell me. I didn't mean to. Dad said no one can talk about it anymore. This really threw me off and I couldn't possibly finish my sentence now. A thick veil of tension materialized between us. So you guys aren't allowed to talk about it? Avery shook his head. Oh, okay. That's cool. No big deal. It was nothing but a big deal. Was their dad doing something illegal down there? Or was it something strange that no one could do anything about it? Maybe their dad was in denial about something going on. There were way too many questions going through my head now. Hey, how about we put on a movie? Yeah, sure. What am I saying? Everyone likes movies, right? Now excited, we decided on a fun movie that quickly pulled our minds away from the mysterious basement door. Well, that's not entirely true. Maybe Avery was distracted, but it was killing me. As we ate popcorn, I couldn't help but watch Avery, wondering what was going on in that little head of his. Was there something awful going on in the house and there was nothing I could do to stop it? Or maybe the dad was just... Stop, I told myself inwardly. Mulling over it all endlessly was not doing myself any favors. So the movie ended and I ushered the drifting child to his bed. Now the house was all to myself until 12, so I had a good 3.5 hours to myself. Immediately, I began texting my friend to tell her all about the weird experience I was having that night. She dismissed it, saying that I was getting spooked by a new place. This annoyed me to no end. I'd been at bigger, way creepier looking houses but never got weird vibes like this. Then I heard it. Stephanie. I went instantly still and listened intently. You didn't hear that, Steph? Just keep texting your friend and... Stephanie. There was no mistaking it this time. It was definitely coming from the basement. The acoustics couldn't have been from Avery upstairs. The voice sounded like a little girl's. In fact, I am not even sure he could make his voice like that anyway. Slowly, I stood up from the couch and approached the door. Maybe like earlier, I was just hearing things. Maybe being creeped out by the house was starting to mess with my head. That made sense, right? Stephanie? I jumped back from the door, almost wetting myself in the process. There was no way I could dismiss it as anything else now. There was a little girl's voice coming from the basement. Hello? I responded. I couldn't keep my voice from shaking. Is this Stephanie? Why yes, it is Stephanie. Can you help me? Who are you? Why are you locked in the basement? My name is Meredith Rosenberg. They kept me locked up for a long time now. The police were almost on to them and that's why they moved. Can you get me out? A cold shock washed over me and made it hard to respond. Was I actually babysitting for a family that kept a little girl prisoner? Oh my god, how long have you been locked up with them? Ever since I can remember. I felt somehow hot and cold at the same time and wanted to throw up. This all made sense now with what Avery had told me. Of course his father didn't want him talking about the door. I just need to find the keys and I can. They were hidden in the garage underneath the metal shelf. It is inside a magnetic key holder. Okay, just hold tight. In a panic to free the poor girl, I darted into the garage and began feeling the space underneath the bottom shelf and sure enough, there was a magnetic key holder there. Running back, I popped the key holder open and began to insert the key into the padlock. Did you find it? Yes, sweetie. I am almost there. Oh, please hurry. Sometimes they come home early. This sent me into even more of a rush, and I barely managed to fumble the key into the padlock. I finally heard the successful click of the padlock, pulled the chain off and slid the deadbolt to the right. I am coming, Meredith. Hold on. I turned the doorknob and threw open the door, only to be met with darkness. Now full of adrenaline, my hands felt around for the light switch. Finally finding my purchase, I flicked the light on which lit up most of the stairs. Meredith? I called out. Unless I was remembering it wrong, it sounded like her voice was just on the other side of the door a minute ago. In fact, it was quite strange that she wasn't waiting for me at the top of the stairs. Wouldn't you immediately run out of a basement that you were locked in for God knows how long? I am down here. The little girl's voice called out. Judging from the distance, it sounded like she was calling from somewhere at the bottom of the stairs. My brain suddenly began piecing all the details of this interaction together and the idea of going down into the basement became absolutely terrifying. Meredith, you can come up now. The door is open. I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. Why I was scared of a little girl was beyond me, but much like the house itself, something felt very wrong here. I hurt my leg, ow. When you said you were getting the key, I went back down to get some of my things and got hurt. Aha. Her sounds of pain filled me with sorrow, but an invisible force was holding me back from taking another step into the basement. Can you move? Maybe pull yourself up on the railing. I can see. It hurts too bad. Okay, sweetie, what is wrong? Won't you help me? It is just really dark down there and I don't want to get hurt too. Is there any way you can get to the stairs? Any way at all? I tried to sit up, but my shoulder hurts too much. I thought you said your leg got hurt. The words hung in the air like a noose. It was only after I said it that I realized there was several things seriously wrong about all of this. A question popped into my head I didn't even have time to think about until now. How did she know where the padlock key was? A deathly silence took up the space between me and wherever this girl was. It was a standoff and I couldn't think of anything else to say. There were questions I could ask her to figure out what was happening, but I felt that her answers weren't going to be honest. Perhaps at this point, the truth was too frightful to know. Meredith? Are you still there? It was a stupid question, but it was the only thing my mind could conjure. The additional silence only unnerved me, so I decided to try and get a better look. Fishing my phone out of my pocket, I clicked on the flashlight. It didn't do me any good because of the awful range, so I did the one thing I'd already told myself not to do. I took a step forward. Maybe it was the angle of the stairs or the lighting, but that one step gave me more information than I ever wanted to know. I caught a better view of the bottom step, which was essentially a ledge into a black abyss. Something looked different on this step, but it took a second to register what it was. The step was wet, a pool of some unknown liquid overflowing into the darkness of the basement. I knew for sure that the father hadn't mentioned any flooding, so it would be way too random for that. So I stood there, watching in frozen curiosity as the puddle then suddenly rippled and I realized the abominable truth. It wasn't tea water. It was a puddle of saliva and something was drooling into it from the dark. A wretched chuckle emanated from the horrid void beyond the step and it cemented me even further into place. It was a wet chortle and positively evil. How did you like my voices? The thing said from the dark. I've been practicing. The epiphany creeped down my spine. It was now talking in Avery's voice. Everything in my body screamed at me to run. I heard the screams, but I couldn't respond no matter how hard I tried. A pity though almost got you. At this, the most gruesome face peeled back the shadows and revealed itself, along with its unearthly mandibles and small fountain of saliva. My faculties finally came to, and I threw myself into the house and kicked the door closed. In mere seconds I had the door bolted and chained. Leaning against the door, my chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath. Just as I felt I was safe, the door shuddered as a terrible blow rocked it. I screamed and ran upstairs to grab Avery. I practically dragged the poor kid out the door and called the police. It wasn't until the operator came on that I realized I was about to report a monster in the house. Thinking quickly, I told them that I heard a burglar in the home. It wasn't long before the police and Avery's parents came home. Nothing was found, even in the basement, but I didn't even care at that point. I just wanted the hell out of that house and away from whatever that thing was. Avery's parents kept glancing at me funny the whole time, probably because they knew I had their basement key. I shoved it into their hands before I hugged Avery and got into my car to drive home. That poor kid has to live in that house with that thing, but there was nothing I could do about it. As long as I am alive, I will never, ever set foot in that house again. And as for basements go, I can't go into them anymore. I just simply can't.